Okay, today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the horror genre, and I'm going to begin in a very different way. So here we go. What goes bump in the night could simply be harmless. A bird, a tree, a bit of debris blown by the wind. But the imagination begins to take hold. The eyes dilate, the heart pounds, thump, 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 thump in the chest. The ears become more alert. Myriads of possibilities fill the mind. What is it? Is it a predator? Is it a ghost? Is it a monster? Is it a demon? The survival instincts, once submerged, now begins to activate. Another thump is heard, and then a third. The mind races. Do I look out the window or do I avoid the window at all costs? Is it something or is it someone? Maybe I should investigate, you think. Maybe I should hide, you think. Maybe I should just hold very still and not move. It's at the door. Terror unfolds. The doorknob turns and turns and turns. And then you decide to open the door, and suddenly, oh no, the horror. No, no. Now we were drawn in, perhaps enchanted, as if by a spell. For thousands of years have prepared us for these kinds of encounters. They are hardwired into us. Today, we are going to explore the evolution of horror, the horror genre as well. With that said, I want you to know no matter the arbitrary times we say it began or when it developed, just know this feeling, this sensation, this sense of fear, this chill that moves through our spine has always been there, lurking in the shadows. So, horror initially is about belief, initially about the belief in good and in evil. Leo Browdy, in his Haunted States, to appreciate any genre, whether it be horror, detective, science fiction, or romance, requires a belief in its basic formal and storytelling elements. If you don't think people dancing in the streets is realistic, forget musicals, right? If you don't think heroes can be battered unmercifully and then bounce back to win the day, forget action movies. But of course, horror is different, right? Now, as a cautionary comment, before we tread further into this topic, for many, the horror genre is not their cup of tea. And that's perfectly all right, of course. For others, well, they are true believers. And that's great too. But it must be articulated that just because one does not enjoy horror does not mean it is devoid of meaning or that it's not important. Horror historically has shaped us profoundly. This talk will acknowledge this debt. But at the core of horror is a question of belief that goes much deeper. It is a belief, if only for a moment, in the existence of maybe, perhaps, could be evil and the possibility of, well, good and their eternal combat that goes back and forth. Such dualistic thinking stretches back to the battle we find between the forces of light and the forces of darkness that we find in Zoroastrianism or in apocalyptic Judaism. So often in horror, although not always, you know what you are against, and that which you are against has a motive, a strategy, and so hopefully can be defeated. It's not simply random chance cause, no, because something like that is difficult to fight. And such an arbitrary negative experience could even make way for the possibility that the cause is, well, you. And you don't want to think that it's your fault. It can't be my fault. It must be something else that's causing it to happen. By placing the label of evil upon it, complete with its expected accompaniment of nefarious motives and vicious attacks, you now have something to oppose. And it's not your fault any longer. It's its fault. And it's, well, it's evil. And by making it evil, by deduction, your side becomes, guess what? It becomes good. It becomes, well, the moral high ground. Now, we must understand that expectations shape feelings into emotions that can have a physical effect. And the more those expectations are widespread in a culture, the less able the individual is to be able to resist them. Typically, each culture and religion inherently has nurtured a set of expectations based on, well, do's and don'ts, taboos, and other baggage. It is the evil you know and believe in that is the greatest threat. Hence, often what scares someone within one culture or religion has less impact on those who have never learned about these expectations outside of it. For those who do believe in whatever evil is formed by their expectations, the result is not confined to one's mind. It goes to one's body as well. Horror taps into our emotions, releases them, exploits them, and opens up pathways to the irrational self. The instinctual self triggered by fight, flight, and freeze. We will suddenly take a ride upon adrenaline and cortisol as your heart begins to race and your blood pressure rises. But one of the greatest fears that we have is the fear of death. Although sometimes public speaking gets number one. Okay. So we have to say that religion and horror are so intimately connected because both are suffused by the distinction between good and evil, and both deal centrally with the uncertain border between life and death. So the question must be asked, says Leo Browdy, is horror basically a secular form that uses religious trappings? Or is it a religious form tricked out in detail by secular reality? One of the basic tenets of all world religions is to say something important, usually something that's consoling, about the relation between life and death. Many of the rituals of religions involve not just one way to live a proper life, but also a way to face and even defeat death through religious practices. Of course, there's no guarantees of certainty. Still, they promise a potential control over that which is uncontrollable, right? But Brownie says that in terms of horror, we must walk down the hall towards that door we know we shouldn't. Yeah, but we know we must finally walk through the valley of death. And so our curiosity about what lies beyond the door, in effect, is to know what lies beyond the world that we know. Death is the end of change. So we want to know what's on the other side of the veil. Our incessant sense of curiosity wishes to be satisfied with some kind of answers to what awaits us beyond the threshold of this life. What awaits us? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it evil? Is it simply nothingness, an oblivion that accounts to non-existence? But these are fertile grounds for the imagination. This frontier beyond is perhaps populated with figures from our religions, or folklore, or cultural expectations. But death is not a rational topic. It is often a domain of fears. And here the imagination goes wild. How do we deal with such thoughts? How do we do it? Right? So, like the rituals of religion, the repetitions of the horror literature and film are, in many ways, Browley mentions this too, a mantra against death. It is one way that we control our fears. It's like prayers, right? Connected to these basic beliefs or rituals that we go through over and over again. We repeat, and it gives us, by watching it vicariously there on the screen or on the page, it enables us to experience it without really experiencing it. And so there's a sense of satisfaction to our curiosity that something has happened. Right? The horror genre, by involving oneself within its framework, can act as a coping mechanism. While it may initially wave the flames of fear that permeates, of course, through the body, it can also act as a form of catharsis, purifying us through this experience. Ultimately, it's not only about death, horror, it's about fear. To a great extent, there is a fear axis in religion that we see in various plots of a horror novel as well as the movies. If you believe, you will be afraid, just as you maybe fear God, is a frequent religious formula. By this logic, it seems if you don't believe, you will not be afraid. But you know, however, we have to horror thereby detaches fear from a specific religious setting and instills it into whatever definition of darkness and evil its audience wishes to supply. Now, this gives horror a flexibility that is often addressed within a religious framework, and it can be specifically made to suit the individual, addressing their personal fears and anxieties by giving shape to them, and then possibly by giving these fears a form, they can then be isolated, maybe even exorcised from oneself. With this, horror can fill a niche often occupied by religious beliefs, making it into a potential secular alternative. So, yes, there is indeed a religious component to it all. Yet, with this said, it's not totally secular in that horror is so often viewed as validating an invisible world. Browdy says, and the worldviews of horror and religion also coincide, meeting in the assumption that there is an invisible spiritual world that parallels, underlies, and infuses the visible physical world. For religions, that world of spirit might contain angels, it may contain demons, but in horror, it tends to be a little darker. It is the Mr. Hyde more than the Dr. Jekyll. Just as religion presents a system for understanding the world, not through scientific details and the interconnections of material circumstances, but through its otherwise hidden system of invisible relationships. So horror turns inside out what usually lurks behind and below the surface of the normal world. It is always there. So there is always more than meets the eye, always a potential card up one's sleeve. And it is all too often not what we see, but what we don't see, what we missed and miscalculated. And there's always a deeper level, a puzzle to be solved, but missing vital pieces. These invisible connections are not always spiritual, but can find its way into a conspiratorial worldview. That there are secret groups and societies, cabals that are working beneath the public eye to control everything through their relationships forged through fear and intimidation and manipulation and torture and via, well, other means. They are viewed as evil, and their power is shrouded in mystery and a web of secrets. So there is a diversity here, right? Browdy also notes, he says, in a novel like Lewis's The Monk, we began in a superficial social reality and gradually penetrate into the catacombs and dungeons that lie beneath. In the Gothic, there is a direct and obvious analogy between the architecture of its gloomy buildings and the recesses of the mind. Secret passageways behind the walls, those trapdoors that open abruptly and throw the unwary down into the depths, paintings behind whose seemingly flat surfaces a shadowy world lurks. Stories like these bridge the gap between private fears and public fears, just as fiction itself in whatever form, literature, drama, and film. It's seemingly in a public space that knits together what is day lit and public with that which is dark and private. Oh, by the way, some answer with Browdy. So Leo Browdy is one of the top scholars in the realm of horror genre. And so he writes a book called The Haunted, which, by the way, is a cornerstone work that I use in my course that I teach at Cal Poly that's called Demons and the Undead and the Monstrous Other. And so I forced my students to go through this book chapter by chapter. So I highly recommend it. That's a plug for good Leo there. Okay. So moving right along. Okay. In such tales, what is underneath, what is invisible becomes to the surface. The reader or viewer is tumbled into whatever darkness he or she feared might be true of the world. While that we knew for sure everything was solid and stable, now suddenly vanishes, he says, into a ghostly vapor. Now I continue. This is me now. With this movement of private space into public space via the conduit of the horror genre, if we are attracted to the private fears as they are exposed, our private fears will also rise to the surface and become public fears, making what we fear open and vulnerable to those around us. We become exposed. You're watching a movie. It's a horror movie. It scares you right down to your toes, right? And you don't know why. And all of a sudden, something that you thought was private or you didn't even know was there rises to the surface. And so it does go from the realm of that which is private into the realm of the public. It's exposed. It's the great reveal. And that crossing can also become a source of much trepidation. We feared to bring our innermost anxieties to the surface, for that could make these fears more solid, more real via this, in a sense, public acclamation. But yet again, once these fears move from the shrouded corners of the unknown to the known, we may stand a chance to address these fears, moving from the darkness into the light. The very thing that scares us could also heal us, as they may reveal deeper mysteries about ourselves and how we react to the world around us. React in the sense at a most primal level that is unfiltered and unfettered by the mind's efficient way to qualify these fears. They are then standing as they are, naked before us. Right? So So horror, by its very nature, attracts and repulses. It operates within the realm of emotion. Now, another scholar, Noel Carroll, in The Paradoxes of the Heart, states that paradoxes summed up can be summed up in the following two questions. How can anyone be frightened by what they know does not exist? Number two, why would anyone even be interested in horror, since being horrified is so unpleasant? She says. Why do we subject ourselves to fictions that will horrify us? Yet it is valid that it works, right? And the works of horror are attractive and repulsive to audiences at the same time. So we feel this, right? We feel this repulsion. We feel this attraction. We're confused. We don't know what to do, right? So where do we go? Now, as early as the 18th century, John and Anna Letitia Akin, in their essay on the pleasure derived from objects of terror, they write as follows. They said, the apparent delight with which we dwell upon objects of pure terror, where our moral feelings are not in the least concerned and no passion seems to be excited, but the depressing one of fear, is a paradox of the heart, difficult of solution. Hume, in his Of Tragedy, explains audiences of tragedy are pleased in proportion as they are afflicted, he says. So why are we built this way? Why are we so riddled by all of these contradictions? Well, of course, where do we go from here? When we are stressed, full of anxiety, or worse still, confront something that registers in our brain that we are directly being threatened and our personal safety is at stake, our bodies are triggered to respond almost automatically. We suddenly go into a response to protect us from harm. Often this results in four reactions: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These reactions were first articulated as far back as 1915 by a certain Walter Bradford Cannon, who was an American physiologist at the Harvard Medical School. And it was first focused upon the idea of fight and fright with pertaining to animals. Later, it was then applied to humans. This reaction really starts in the spinal cord. You've heard the phrase that one feels the shivers down one's spine or back. This is because this is where the response is initially felt. The sympathetic nervous system then receives these signals from the dorsal hypothalamus, which increases the heart rate, increases vascular resistance, and thus increasing the blood flow, and to where? To the muscles, to the heart, to the brain, right? And then all of a sudden, we're a flood of chemicals, right? The adrenal medulla releases the catecholamines, and they will then increase in response. Then you have others going through the body. We're just shot full of all these chemicals. And these chemicals do increase our blood pressure, our blood sugar, but also, unfortunately, suppress the immune system. And so we get this burst of energy, right? But the epinephrine is going to our liver cells, right? And so the glucose is produced. And while the cortisol turns the fatty acids into available energy in someone, we are a soup of chemicals ready to respond. Oh, and our pupils dilate. And we got to take in more light, right, to see things, increase our vision. And so this is why you get the famous image of people's eyes are really big. It's like people's because we're trying to notice what's going on. But now we have a choice. We are now this big soup, how much our responses are qualified and controlled by societal context and our own nurtured thoughts and beliefs varies from person to person. Do we become more aggressive or more prone to taking that energy and running away? Right? Animals have the responses built in by instinct, but even they vary at times. We categorize these possible options as fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. It is interesting that two of them are included as part of the four basic drives of animals, that being fighting and fleeing, and the other two is feeding and mating. So what happens if you fight? Well, you choose aggression. Your heart rate increases, and you will feel this rush of adrenaline, and your jaw is going to start to tighten. With this said, you will often raise your voice, yell, and even physically lash out. Anger is often felt. What about flight? Well, you choose to run away. While your heart races, you feel you cannot be still. You become like jumpy and feel trapped. And there's this need to escape. This claustrophobia surrounds you. Freeze. Here, your body goes the opposite of the first two and simply just kind of shuts down. Your heart rate decreases. You experience a sense of disassociation. You become detached from yourself and your environment. There's numbness of the body, even immobility, right? What a fawn. That's kind of a new one on this one. This is to be submissive and obedient. Please them and appease them, complying to whatever is being asked, surrendering. Yet this fear can also, of course, release dopamine, a chemical that can also make us feel, well, really good. So fear does produce endorphins, which can give us well, a natural high. And so while fear stirs in us, it can also connect to arousal. So being nervous and scared can be arousing. This is called the suspension bridge effect. Now bring that all into the horror genre. For in this case, we can have the fear, experience it even bodily without being in actual danger. We can curl up with a spooky book or watch a scary movie or play a frightening video game and feel all those chemicals move through your body and yet still be theoretically safe. And as a bonus, all those chemicals can be at the same time, well, very pleasurable. It makes everything more intense, makes us feel alive. Those who watch and enjoy horror often become, well, adrenaline junkies. You see, on some level, your body is not certain if the threat within the book or the movie or the game is real or not. When in fight mode, let's go through this. When in fight mode, what happens when you watch a horror movie? Haven't you noticed? You're in fight mode. So you're sitting there and you are sitting forward. Oh, you're starting to figure this out. And you're going, no, no, don't go into the basement. No, no, don't go into the attic. Don't look behind the door. Oh, don't open it. Don't look at the window. Don't do it. Don't do it. And you're like this, and you're getting aggressive. You're going, what's happening? You're in fight mode. I can't believe that happened, right? Oh. Well, what about flight mode? Well, flight mode is like this. Oh, I can't look. Oh, oh, I can't. No, 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 no. I can't. I don't want to see it. Oh, no. Oh, I can't watch this part. Oh, no, no. Oh, I got. Can I? I'm gonna leave the room for a moment. I just can't handle it. No, I just can't leave the room. Flight mode. What about the freeze mode? We all know that one. That's popcorn, maybe. You just kind of sit there. You don't know what to do. You're just kind of frozen. What about Fawn? Now, Fawn's as a newcomer, and you're thinking, how would Fawn fit in with this? It does. It does. It's a rationalization. It's like, well, maybe they'll get out of this situation, yeah, well, maybe give in, I just surrender to the monster. I give up. I'll try to please you. I'll become the monster. Okay, so you get the idea. Um, so, uh, so often we want this roller coaster life. We like it. This is one of the reasons also why we're completely addicted to roller coasters, because you know what's going to happen. You know what's really happening. Did you guys know that because in the roller coasters you're dropping, your body's thinking, "I'm going to die. Death is happening. Oh, oh, okay, I made it. I'm going to die again." So you're telling your body, because, if you're dropping like that, you're telling your body, hey, you're going to die. And all those chemicals are shooting through your body. At the very end, you're going, oh, I feel pretty good. This is really great. Yeah, you just told your body you're going to die about 5 or 6 times. But hey, that's wonderful because you got that adrenaline high. And that's oftentimes what is involved in this process, right? Is this making sense? It can be good, and it also can be not so good. So it just depends on how you do it. Now, we actually do have a slide to show you. So let's go. Let's go to the first one and take a look at that. So we're moving on to Rudolf Otto and the idea of the holy. You see, in fact, what will happen here is that there is a connection between horror and the religious experience. Horror may connect to instinctual feelings, especially in terms of what is lacking or denied in a materialistic or positivist culture. So, in fact, the experience of supernatural horror in the arts is frequently uh, made an analogy towards religious experience. The shock and awe of horror satisfies an instinctual conviction in something beyond our ordinary concepts. So, Rudolf Otto, which I had to read in the university in his The Idea of the Holy, he states that religion has a non rational element, an ineffable object, which he refers to as the numen, not to be confused with Seinfeld, right? It is the object, the numen is the object of religious experience or numinous experience, also known as mysterium, tremendum, fascinans et augustum. This religious experience, or let's say God, is tremendous. It causes fear in the subject, a paralyzing sense of being overpowered, of being dependent, of being nothing, of being worthless. The numen is awful, resulting in a sense of awe. The numen is also mysterious. It is wholly other, beyond the sphere of the usual, the intelligible, and the familiar in such a way that induces a stupor. It gives us a blank feeling of wonderment, an astonishment that strikes one dumb, a kind of amazement that is absolute. This encounter with the holy other does not simply terrify the subject, it also makes one fascinated. Its tremendous energy and urgency excites our allegiance. We want to know. We do want to know. So this is the idea of the numinous. Let's go to the next image. This different order. This is a good example. You do want to see it. This is an example of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So, but you may want to just take note of that. That's a good chart and gives a nice summary to what I was just expressing just a few moments before. Okay, so let's take down the images, and you're back to me again. So, okay, so horror also connects to this sense of exhilaration, to a heightened emotional state. So now, certain thrills and chills were commonplace to our cave dwelling ancestors, but they are rare in this era now. And so some have surmised that we feel this lack of constantly having our adrenaline move up because we're living in a safer world, believe it or not. There's not a predator hidden around the next corner. So what happens is that this habitual aspect of reaction has gone not dormant, but it's gone a little sleepy. And but still it's part of our biological makeup to feel these kind of feelings. This was part of our survival. This is why we've evolved to be where we are today. This is why we exist, is the fact that we are able to face these fears and react in enough time to, well, skedaddle from the saber-toothed tiger that wants to consume us, right? Or the angry bear, right? We have developed this means of doing so, right? And so what's happened is that in many ways, the sensation is repressed, right? So that's another reason that horror is interesting, is because it connects to ideas related to power. Have you noticed? These are horrific beings. They're like demons or deities, right? But they attract us with their power. They give us a sense of awe, and that sense of awe, of course, see Otto, right before, gives us a sense of the numinous. It does move through us. It terrifies us, but at the same time, it also gives us a sense of life, right? So there you have it. Okay, so um, other bits and pieces. I hope you're getting the nice introduction here. Um, of course, there's also the question of monsters. Yes, so monsters are one of the most ancient of fears. So let's dive into it. So, of course, we see monsters throughout the horror genre, right? Um, so they are sometimes connected to the realm of unthought, but let's go there. So there is another scholar. His name is Cohen, and we're going to go over the Cohen thesis of what a monster is, and I'll of course go through the meanings of this. And this, of course, taps right in to the horror genre. So a monster body is a cultural body. So the monster is born only at a metaphoric crossroads. It is an embodiment of certain cultural moments of a time, of a feeling, of a place. So this body encompasses the fears and anxieties of that time and that place and that culture, yet also incorporates our desires and fantasies too. So in a sense, the monster is pure culture. It is pure culture. You want to understand the various cultures over a period of time? A good way of doing it is seeing and studying their monsters. Examine them, because they are the embodiment of their fears. So what will happen is the monster almost becomes a blank slate, and whatever fears the society has or the religion has, what they do is they kind of throw it right there onto the monster. I'm scared of this, we're worried about this, and this and this and this and this. And that monster then takes shape because we are creating the monster from our own fears. Now, in a microcosm, what will happen is that those you oppose, oftentimes what they will do is, if you oppose a certain group, a certain party, a certain belief, what a person will do is they'll make that belief into a blank slate, or that group into a blank slate, or that a concept into a blank slate. And then what they'll do is they'll throw whatever they fear upon it and see if it sticks. And better still, if there are aspects of the other that seems to lend support to corresponding to certain one of these ideas, then hey, it can be exaggerated, it can be monstrosized, demonstrated in a big way, and you create a monster. We're seeing that right now at election time. We're creating monsters of the other. Always, it's our fears, constant. Number two, monsters always escape. There is this lurking dread that the monster, if it is a monster at all, is never defeated, but must come back, often to inflict revenge. Yet they're returning monsters. These returning monsters, they're often arrive in a different form, changed in some way. So we do not always recognize them. Hence, the monster is, again, a product of pure culture, but it also, because that culture changes, the monster has to evolve with the times in much the same way. So that goes along with our fears. So it's always just a little different because we change, our fears change, and so our monsters will change with us. Number three, the monster is the harbinger of categorical crisis. What does that mean? The monster then escapes precisely because it refuses easy categorization. They refuse to be part of easy classification and thereby remain undefined, always occupying a place of the unknown. We don't like to have things that are uncategorized, right? We don't like to have things that are unknown. It paralyzes us, right? So we want to have everything categorized. We want to know where everything is. Number four, Cohen says, monsters dwell at the gates of difference. The monster then represents the unknown, the quintessential outsider, that which is outside of the reader's cultural context, inclusive of belief, culture, and even race, is deemed as too different to integrate into the status quo. With this, these differences become exaggerated, they become inflated, and of course, they are made to appear even more dangerous, right? So there you have it, right? Number five, the monster polices the borders of the possible. The monster stands as a warning against exploration, against curiosity, to step outside the official view, the standard beliefs. It is to ask for the monster to attack, or worse still, you could become the monster yourself. The move to cross this threshold could make you into something grotesque, something that is unsightly and is to be avoided. You're crossing over into the realm of taboo, right? And so we don't want that, or people say they don't want that. And you can see how this is, the monster is going to be used. That's why you see the monster is always at the edge of the map of the known world, because you go too far and the monsters are going to get you. And it's induced to keep people at home, keep people within their belief system. It keeps people into conformity. Sounds like 1984 all over, right? This is the idea of the monsters. They stand here and they border it. Of course, anybody that has creative thought that thinks outside the box could indeed be threatened, or they actually could be the monster. Now, number six, fear of the monster is a kind of desire. Now we're going somewhere else. Yet that which is taboo, that which is forbidden, does indeed attract us because we desire to know. Monsters are permitted to express themselves without any censor. Yeah, they're monsters. Let's plow down Tokyo, right? They are given free rein to cross the boundaries. They can go into these places. They have freedom. Right? We often entertain escapist fantasies with these monsters. If we become the monster, if we follow our fantasies into this transformation, mentally, physically, spiritually, will our desires become satisfied? Is the satisfaction worth the price of becoming an outsider? Becoming one who lurks on the fringes? Is the price too high? Or maybe it's not too bad at all. become the monster, right? And of course, number 7, the monster stands at the threshold of becoming. This thing of darkness I acknowledge is mine, right? Cohen says these monsters ask us to reevaluate our cultural assumptions. Our cultural assumptions about race, about gender, about sexuality, our perception of difference, our tolerance towards its expression. We need to ask the question, why have we created these monsters? Why do they lurk at all? Why are they here? And so these are, of course, are very important questions, right? So what do you guys think? You kind of seen how everything kind of pieces together, right? Okay. So I'm flipping through these monster of pages here, and let's go into more of the background. I think you're understanding more about the horror genre than you'd expected, but let's go into prehistory. Humans have been afraid since we first gathered around campfires, says Browdy, at night to tell stories of the inhabitants of the darkness that stalk just beyond the edge of light. And some have theorized that fear of the dark, say its vestige of the cavemen's fears of lurking predators, is what first initiated this idea. So, in the tale of terror, whatever form it takes, we are pulled down the hallway to a door we don't wish to open, to see what we have been warned not to see. Curiosity and dread pulls us back and forth until curiosity finally wins. We search out the monstrous in hopes that it won't find us unawares. Now, let's go here. So, we sometimes preserve these early instinctual fears, and other times we don't. While certain ideas can be learned, there are behaviors that some people just do walking down a long hallway that's dark. So let's talk about this. Okay, so what happens is this. Some of us, for example, we're afraid of long hallways, long dark hallways with many doors. And we wonder, why are we afraid of this? What's to be scared of? And yet what happens is this oftentimes gives us a primal fear that, okay, first of all, we're trapped. There's a long passage, maybe hearkening to days when there is like a narrow ravine, right? And then all these doors could be a possibility of something behind them. So there's all these potential scary things that are hidden behind the doors. And so all of a sudden, we don't know why, but our heart starts pumping. We start looking around and we become paranoid. Also, of course, in the darkness. Other times, we get scared of, come on. I know some of you listening have had this experience. You are afraid of the monster under the bed, are you not? This enclosed dark space that's just beneath where you sleep, underneath your pillow, right? I mean, Monsters Inc. Didn't make money for nothing, right? Right? Or you're afraid of other spaces like attics. It's dark up in that attic. You can't see anything, and it's an enclosed space. We don't know what's in there. Oh, we're afraid of basements. What goes on down there, right? Some of us, we're afraid in a physical sense, to the point where when we're sleeping, you know who you are. You're sleeping and you're afraid to stick your little feet out because maybe a monster will grab it. So some of us, what we do is we cover up our feet and we feel safe, right? Others of us say we got to have the windows closed because I don't want anybody looking in. We have these instincts. We have these ways of coping with things in a very obvious way. Some of us, I want to mention this, some of us need to have the door closed in our bedroom because we feel like we're safe there. There's no potential to come at us. So we create this fortress, so to speak. So we are by nature, we do these this habits. Not always, not all of us do it, but these are residuals of these ideas, right? So fear in antiquity and in the Middle Ages goes into the idea that, well, as civilization develops and knowledge of the physical world expands, the monsters are pushed further back into the periphery, along with the Amazons, right? So, so that's what happens. So even though, of course, you have at times at the blank spaces on old maps where, you have what says, "Here lie dragons." Eventually, that space gets filled in, and that which is scary on the peripheral areas, in a geographical sense, go further and further away. So, Odysseus, right? He goes and does his travels, and he's on his way back to Penelope, his beloved. And he goes to all these exotic places that are filled with dangers and godlike beings and jackal-headed Anubis of Egypt, or the bull-headed Minotaur of Crete. We're going to see these creatures as well, right? So uh, these are in a sense a realm during the time where there is so much that is unknown. There's so much that is darkness, and so this terrifies us. Now, I want to say one more thing here, is that in these centuries before electric lights, darkness was more familiar, although often more terrifying, and the invisible world became more real and more of a threat. What we so often forget in the modern age, at least in places where technology is readily available, is that darkness often permeated everything. A moonless night, or a night where clouds obscured the moon, even if it was present, was quite dark indeed. We are so accustomed to light being somewhere. We have street lights and signals, night lights, and lights from our clocks and electronic devices. The ambient light, even that emanates from our towns and cities, surround us and obscure the stars above. But what of total darkness, where to create light, you have to ignite a fire in a hearth, or on a torch, or within a lamp? Here, where wood or oil is needed to fuel the light, you have, well, which is often a limited resource. Here you have, maybe light's not always possible. It's not always available. In this environment where the sun goes down, the day is essentially over, and there was not much to do. Most in ancient times were illiterate, so the idea of curling up with a good book was something for the wealthy or the clergy. Some, not all, did eat late, but that usually did not last long. And as far as going out at night, again, the wealthy could enjoy such gatherings, having both wood and oil to burn, as well as extra resources. But for the average person in the ancient world, they faced a long night ahead, a long night of darkness. You didn't want to stroll along the dark paths and highways, for thieves lurked about, and wild animals, and perhaps something even more sinister, were there. Home and hearth was where you wanted to be as the night descended, as the darkness came about, and as it enclosed you. You see, the darkness is an isolating force, and it also binds us, giving rise to our most primal fears. Here, in the often cramped conditions of a house, the imaginations ran wild, and with every noise and shadow, a potential threat was seen, and the tongues, they wagged. The stories began to be woven into what would may be there, lurking under the cloak of darkness. Ghost stories are nothing new, and some have survived from ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient China. But more than ghosts, monsters too were out there, and were still, believe it or not, malevolent humans with supernatural powers could be out there, and you could, by accident, let them in. And at the right moment, they could drop their disguise and reveal who they really were. The ancient and medieval world was forged in the darkness where death was potentially just around the corner. Unescaped, unforeseen. It was there, always there. So Yeah. So Carl Jung, sorry, actually go back to Sigmund. Sigmund Freud considered that the repression of the primitive self and its instincts was the price to pay for civilization and the creation of a socially acceptable identity. And so, with the modern age, we lost this extra experience of the darkness. Now, Carl Jung said, basically, thought of the dark self as the shadow whose power increased the longer it was repressed. His kind of analysis is therefore frequently more attuned to the loss involved by repression in the name of social order as well as customs. And he frequently draws upon folk tales and myths to define that area of self that he calls the unconscious. You see, for Carl Jung, because we have repressed our relationship with the realm of darkness, pushed it out of sight and mind, perhaps even exorcising it in a illuminating world where the light is ever present, the specter of darkness, when it is still a part of us, has moved into the abode of the unconscious mind. Here, these darker mental formations reside, repressed, unrecognized, dwelling within our shadow selves. Yet they are still here. And the repression only makes them darker. And of course, our darker selves become more determined to find a way out, to find expression. And you guess what? Channels are found, uh, places and spaces where that which is hidden can find validation. A dark tale is heard, the curiosity flickers, the mind stirs. Somewhere deep in the subconscious, there is identification. Something resonates. We relate, we understand it, and we wish to hear more. In fact, we need to hear more. These ideas are repressed by entire societies, moving into the collective unconscious as archetypes, moving into the collective unconscious as monsters ready to escape. The more we then that then repress into these ideas that are within our shrouded selves, the more the pressure is to have these ideas released. At least that's what Carl Jung believes. So, what about the first um, more formal articulation of what will evolve into horror? Actually, it comes from the idea of tragedy, and it does come from Aristotle. He says that my design is to treat poetry in general and of its several species, to inquire what is the proper effect of each. What construction of a fable or plan is essential to a good poem? Of what and how many parts each species consists, with whatever else belongs to the same subject matter. Then he continues, tragedy, he says, brings about the catharsis of pity and fear. Tragedy has reversals, recognitions, and calamities. Tragedy is designed to cause an emotional response. Aristotle saw early on that we needed to experience fear in a form outside of the direct threat and within literature, within what we could understand as even entertainment. This is tragedy within what we could understand. This idea is also inclusive of what is depicted on the stage as tragedy by the Greeks and later the Romans. We need this to achieve catharsis, to purify ourselves of these emotions by recognizing them, realizing them in thought and feeling, and then releasing them. To work through these feelings while vicariously observing them from a safe distance can be a healthy process. And then from here to create space for other pursuits. So we have that. Then we move on to John of Damascus, lived between 675 to 749. And he's an Eastern Orthodox theologian. He listed 6 varieties of fear. He says, first of all, there's shrinking, there's shame, there's disgrace, there's anxiety, there's consternation, and there's panic. Now, Leo Browdy says that of these, shrinking, fear is something about to happen; shame, fear aroused by anticipation of blame; disgrace, fear arising from a base act already committed; and anxiety, fear of failure or misfortune, were fears generated out of reality. Not a term that he would have used, but while consternation and panic were products of the imagination. Then in the late 18th century, John Trusler reflected on Damascus, and he said as follows, that there is a distinguishment between fear, which acts upon the mind, and terror, which disrupts the senses, and consternation, which affects the heart. So there you have it. So what will happen now is we move on to the evolution of the grotesque. Grotesque is the next component into our horror genre soup. So let's go there right now. And let's start with this next image. We're finally at an image. So originally, the word came from the Italian. It means cave or grotto, hence grotesque or grotto-esque. What happens is that in the late 15th century, a certain Raphael Sanzio, he was remembered as a great painter. He was at that time the head of antiquities for Rome. He was also one of the chief architects for the Vatican. And they discovered something near the Roman Forum. They discovered Nero's Domus Aurea, or his golden house. Now, this was near a natural hill by the Colosseum. The site was what happened is they were digging a well and they ran into it, and in fact, when they dug this well, they ran right into the dome of one of the large central buildings of the golden house of Nero. And they looked around. They found these large rooms, big walls. But they also found various paintings. These paintings, let's go to the next image, were understood as grotesque, that to be found within the grottos. Now, what happened is that also this style is connected to discoveries in Pompeii, where they also saw the same kind of forms. And so grotesque, in a general term, was used for any abnormal combination of human, animal, and natural elements. So it's a combination between these elements. So let's go to the next image. So here, that which is unnatural is given expression, that by its very combination, it seems to be wrong. And it makes one feel uncomfortable, unsettled, and open to concerns that if this is out of balance, perhaps we are too, and our understandings of the world could be out of balance as well. These combinations may even emotionally upset us, turn our stomachs, but they will also make you think. Let's go to the next image. It'll make us think about what they are about, right? Good. Okay, so thank you for showing that. That's perfect. So we do have this, right? And later on, the term is also combined with arabesque, which describes fantastic Moorish designs, although it's without the animal-human combination form. Edgar Allan Poe, by the way, in some of his unpublished stories, actually, one single volume, he called it The Tales of the Grotesque and the Arabesque. So it's the idea that it's a combination of something that is startling and is titillating, and it is mysterious, but it is by its very form alarming. It's a problem, right? So we now move into the early modern era. Now, as we arrive to the time of the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation of the mid-16th century, there seems to be this new context, and there seems to be this focus upon the destruction of, well, on one side the Catholics, on the other side the Protestants, and these ideas seem to be so much part of society at that time. Not that the earlier centuries, such as the 14th century, excuse me, with its 100-Year War between France and England and the bubonic plague, were times of harmony. But with this said, because we're creating now the context directly of horror, with that said, at least in religion, most areas of the Western Europe outside of Spain were nominally Catholic. I mean, you had various opposers like the Waldensians and the Cathars in the south of France, as well as the crushing Inquisition as a response. But on average, the common person said that there was just one Church of Rome, one Eucharist, and, well, in some cases, well, oftentimes, one God, at least in public. The enemies were from without in this earlier period and not within, with some major exceptions, with the focus then on the Crusades, on fighting Islam, both in the Holy Land and the Reconquista of Spain. But by the 1400s, the Crusades were greatly diminished in the Eastern Mediterranean, and by 1492, the conquest of Spain for Christendom was almost complete. The Reformation, this Reformation period of time was different, with Western Europe now split on the basis of religious beliefs rather than simply politics as usual. And that is an important distinction. You see, you have two major opposing teams, and since it was religion, you could impose upon it a good versus evil scenario. So therefore, the devil was on whatever side that you were opposing. And therefore, those working on that side were the devil's minions, right? So this is how things go. All religions were being questioned, and the power of evil seemed more all-consuming than ever before. Just as medieval Christianity had redefined the gods of the old religions of Northern Europe, Odin, Thor, Freya, as fiends and demons, many Protestants considered Catholics to be the spawn of Satan, and Catholics often returned the favor. In essence, what had been in the more monolithic world of medieval Catholicism, a difficult but practical commerce between the world of material reality and the world of the intangible spirit, became instead a polarized opposition in which Catholics and Protestants competed as experts of the invisible world of faith. And so you have this here. So the invisible world brought us back to our fears in monsters lurking in the dark. And as a result, we spun new stories using old mythologies and gave them form in pamphlets and broadsides and in books. The invention of the printing press had already made such materials available to wider audiences. But now in the 16th century, the presses ran hot with such stories that fueled the popular imagination, but also created a propaganda against the opposing side. They were not merely evil, working with the devil. They were indeed the monsters. So beware, right? So for the Elizabethan royalists like Edmund Spencer, the monster may be called Archmago, the Catholic master of false appearances. For a nonconformist Protestant allegorist like John Bunyan, the monster might be the giant Despair, who lives in Doubting Castle, lying in wait to catch a wandering Christian as he strays away from the faith. So let's get to the next image. And while the independent Protestant John Milton, so next image, in his epic Paradise Lost, described the mythic monsters and gods of paganism as warped and distorted perceptions of an undying Christian truth. He also says it is often easy enough to find that these monsters have always been with us. In the era of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, uh, when reason was being invoked to clarify and solve human social problems, and people look around and thought that, well, they saw that life has changed, all of a sudden, people were afraid of this change. Let's go to the next image. Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, published in 1590. Now, in this poem, a dragon in its allegory is identified as Satan, and it is terrorizing the kingdom of Eden and threatening the king's daughter, Una, who represents the singleness of divine truth. Now, by the end of the book, the Red Cross knight, who seems like a Templar, a callow youth at the start, has matured enough that he can defeat the dragon and win Una for his bride. But as the villagers in the court came out of their hiding places to celebrate Red Cross's victory, one wiser person warns others that the seemingly dead and defeated dragon may still be alive, or that inside it there are still other dragons waiting to be born. Meanwhile, another person points out that the dragon's eyes are, well, are open. The point is clear. Evil can never be totally and finally defeated. The battle may be won, but not necessarily the war. So let's see me for a few seconds. Now, of course, the dragon archetype is common throughout the world, and especially within the within the Indo-European guise, this dragon is often viewed as evil. Now, I do recognize that other cultures do not. We see this in China and other places. I'm just talking about the Indo-European context. So whether Indra, who, by the way, Indra in India is connected to the Vedas, which is Indo-European. So Indra fights the dragon who guards the monsoon rains. The Hittite Tarhunas fights the dragon Ilyankas, who also guards the treasure. And then, of course, you have Thor, who fights the great serpent of Middle Earth. This archetype is everywhere. We see this also the idea of knights fighting the dragon who is guarding a treasure or a maiden. This is common. But for Spencer, unfortunately, he has another agenda for his story. He was Lord Deputy of Ireland. He had the mission of reducing, he says, that savage nation to better government and civility. Yikes. So Spencer was a part of those who were imposing English rule upon Ireland and dealing with Irish rebellions, which were thought as barbarous. So this is the reason behind his story, this conflict and perception that informed his narrative, with the English as the knight and the Irish as the dragon. Here, real life fears influenced this tale, as real life events and wars would later influence Gothic and the horror genre and literature in general, and moving on, of course, into movies. So let's go to the next image. So what's the epicenter that really shook us into the horror genre? It was the great earthquake of Lisbon. It happened on November 1st, 1755. There was an enormous earthquake, as well as a tsunami. It destroyed most of Lisbon, Portugal. Between 10,000 to 100,000 were killed. This is the third largest earthquake ever to hit a city, ranging around 9.0. And of course, the news spread quickly because, well, we had the development of the newspaper. So it reached everyone in an immediate sense. So there was no delay. Newspapers are around. We're getting this right away. Now, here's a problem. Next image. Problem is, the earthquake did not make sense for many Catholics. You see, Lisbon was considered a very pious city. It was one of the centers for the Jesuit order. And when did this happen? This devastation happened on November 1st, All Saints Day, and it happened while everyone was in church, or most everyone was in church, and with the roofs of these buildings collapsing upon them. So they were in mass. They were worshiping God when this earthquake struck and the churches collapsed upon them. Many innocent civilian lives were lost. However, there was one part of the city that only suffered minor damage, and most of it was preserved. That part of the city was the red light district. You can imagine what the reactions are. It's like, wait, the holy city of Lisbon is destroyed by an earthquake. The pious are in the churches and they're praying to God, and all of a sudden the ceiling comes collapsing upon them. They all die, they're wiped out. And who are the ones who survive? Those in the red light district? God decided to preserve them? Well, you can see many began at this moment in 1755 to question God, because it forcefully implied the possibility that perhaps God is not all good. Or if he's good, then perhaps his power is limited. Or maybe the purpose for the world included death and destruction, even to those who are pious and believing Christians. Many rationalize various ideas. The Jesuits asserted that even though many were innocent, the disaster was proof that, well, it's because others were guilty that were amongst them. So they died because maybe their neighbor wasn't so innocent as they thought. Protestants, of course, you say we're going with this one, view this disaster as judgment of God against not only the Jesuits and the Inquisition, especially those in the Netherlands, but also, of course, that saying that the Catholics are wrong, that God is on the side of the Protestants, not the Catholics. Voltaire viewed this as proof of the lie of all religions. The Portuguese often saw it as proof of God's disapproval over their weak ruler, Jose I, and maybe their difficulties with the British. So maybe this was a Job-like test for their righteousness. Go to the next image. Many scientists saw this disaster as proof of how nature operates contrary to human expectations, right? And so in many cases, it elevated a sort of Gnostic-like duality because it is material and not under God. So therefore, it must be, it fell because it's under like a demiurge, like under the realm, the material realm of the devil. That's why, because God was more spirit, you know? So people became dualistic, or they stopped believing altogether. Yet this occurred, so thank you for showing those images. This occurred during the Enlightenment, at a time of the revolutionary uprisings that said that we had a great future ahead, that the reason was going to change the world, that the specter of the monstrous harkened back to a gloomy past magic and alchemy no longer meant anything. No, we're envisioning utopias, a humanity marked by ideals of progress and of occupations centered upon the mind, of knowledge and of wisdom. So how can this be? So there seems to be this other kind of focus. So, right. But and then of course there is a new kind of spirituality that's spreading, and that's called deism, right? So deism is spreading, but horror supplied an alternative history, and fear promised a new commitment to faith for individuals who seem adrift in this new positivist like world where personal identity was more obvious out of their control than ever before. People don't like change, even if it seems like it's positive change. They don't want it to happen, and so they were unmoored. They're attracted to their own fears. They want that back, and if suppressed, in an age of reason, the irrational rose to the surface throughout Western Europe. It is as if we were actually afraid of losing the chaos, the superstitions, the darkness, and panicked, and we tried to rebuttress these grand edifices of traditional folklore that were the home of ghosts and monsters and of other spirits. So there you have it. In Germany and in England, of course, there is this feeling of let's go back to the Middle Ages and the realm of the picturesque. So you have this idea of tapping in to folk myths of the countryside. Let's preserve them. And people started collecting old ballads, and they wanted to continue in a romantic sense, romanticism, these traditions and these ideas. They wanted this idea of heart and soul, and they thought this is what humanity's about. We cannot just be that which is the intellect. And so, in the midst of this, will arise what we understand as Gothic literature. So, the term Gothic and the development of the genre is an interesting story. You see, what happens is this: the word Gothic at first referred to a barbarian, either an Ostrogoth or a Visigoth, who basically were the ones who attacked and dismembered the Roman Empire. Then, when it goes into its adjectival form, the word is officially, it described the medieval cathedrals that in the 17th century were just starting to be looked at with some interest, although they were usually considered barbaric and crude. Browley says their gloomy interiors and haunted corridors were redolent of the medieval Catholicism. Protestant reformers across Europe, in a similar way, preached that any image purporting to show the invisible world in general and the divine in particular were to be demolished as objects of idolatry. And of course, the Catholic Church, they had these in order to dazzle the eye, and therefore it threatens to darken the soul. In short, the term Gothic was forged out of the Protestant prejudice against Catholics, saying that their architectural style and designs in general were as backward as the Goths were to the sophisticated Romans. Now, of course, it is the same kind of belief that also helped shape the idea of the Middle Ages. The term came from Melchior Goldust. He first coined it in 1604, and then in 1610 by a certain John Seldom, an English jurist. And the idea is that it is now suddenly this age of the middle of what? The middle of two great ages. What are those great ages? The age of Rome and the age of the modern world, which is, of course, inclusive eventually of the Enlightenment. And that becomes the idea. So the Middle Ages are just like where Catholicism dominates, is now placed into the background. So what will happen now is folk. As I said, folks were collected. Ancient poets exhumed. During the middle of this, there will appear even literature uh, that connects to these ideas. In fact, so what will happen is Gothic literature, excuse me, often describes words uses such as the words wonder and terror, and focuses on beyond that which is immediately in front of us. So this is what the Gothic uh, literature is focused upon. Most early Gothic literature is set, believe it or not, during the Middle Ages. Now, I think it's interesting because today we focus upon the idea of the Victorian house as a quintessential haunted place. But it's fascinating because I actually have a few of these novels at home, and from the 19th century. And when they describe uh, the haunted places, these are oftentimes these aged 18th century manors, and they're crumbling and falling into ruin. 18th century, early 19th century manners. And then when I go to that literature from that time, they go back and they sit in the early 19th century and late 19th, sorry, sorry, uh, um, early 19th century and late 18th century. What they do is they describe castles. So it's always something that seems to be a little older, right? So most Gothic literature at first was focused on the Middle Ages, the medieval period, and the sceneries. Let's go to this next image. The scenery typically involves decay, death, something morbid. The authors who wrote Gothic novels and poems often were considered at the margins of popular culture. They're at the very fringe. People like Horace Walpole, let's go to the next image, William Beckford, and Percy Shelley. So these are those who are at the edge, who are at the periphery, those who are focused upon this literature were those who are outcasts. They hung around cemeteries. They talked about dark topics. They investigated the occult. They were lived a life that was considered at times suspicious. So, yeah. Okay, so thank you for showing that. Now, we now get to a more of a straight definition of Gothic literature, and that comes from Montagu Summers. Now, Montagu Summers puts together a fourfold classification of what Gothic is. I mean, we're right now heart and center of what we're supposed to be talking about. Now, but who is Montagu Summers? Well, he lived between 1880 to 1948. He was an English author, he was a clergyman, and he was an occultist. He's viewed as quite eccentric himself. He believed in many kinds of beings. In fact, he really did believe in the existence, for example, of vampires and werewolves. He also delved into Satanism, saying he attended black masses in Bruges and Brighton and in London. Well, we believe Brighton, just joking. He also converted to Catholicism around 1909, and then he presented himself as a Catholic priest. But we can't find any evidence that he ever was a Catholic priest or he was ordained, but he just simply started acting like one, and people just believed him. So, hey, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. He published much on the occult, but he is the one who first defines Gothic literature. And he defines it as follows. First of all, number one. So it is understood in four different parts. Number one is he describes as historic Gothic. This is a tale set in the imagined past. So historic Gothic is a tale set in the imagined past. It does not have the suggestion of any supernatural events. So it's an imagined past. It goes back into a romantic era, but there's nothing supernatural going on. That is historic Gothic. Number two, you have what is called natural or explained Gothic. Natural or explained Gothic. This introduces what appears to be supernatural phenomena, but then provides rational reasons for why this phenomena is actually occurring. An example with that would be like Anne Radcliffe's Mysteries of Udolpho, published in 1794. Basically, it appears to be supernatural, but then, of course, it's deducted that it's not. So this would be like Scooby Doo, right? It's always a mystery. Ooh, there's a ghost. There's a ghost. Oh no! And so, of course, what they do is, Scoob and Shaggy and the gang, they investigate and they find out that there are rational reasons for why it's happening, right? So, not to say that Scooby Doo is Gothic, but there you. It's the first time you ever hear that. You have what's called equivocal Gothic. Equivocal Gothic keeps the supernatural origin of events in the text ambiguous. It promotes this idea by giving us disturbed characters. So we're not sure. It could be supernatural. It may not be. So we're caught in between, and sometimes being caught in between keeps us reading. And finally, of course, you have supernatural Gothic. Here, the existence and cruel operation of unnatural forces are asserted graphically. So not always cruel. Sometimes it can be romantic in a positive sense. We will find that out in a few moments. So the idea is that supernatural Gothic there is something that is spooky going on, and the answer is that it is a ghost, a monster, a ghoul, a specter of some sort. It's not a bit of undigested beef potato. It's something that's a little deeper than all that. Okay, so let's go to the next image. An early Gothic, pre-Gothic, I should say, idea comes from Heinrich August Osenfelder's The Vampire. This is actually a short German poem, but it's important when it comes to understanding the Gothic genre and horror genre, because it romanticizes the vampire. In fact, these nocturnal creatures that were connected to terror, they turn into erotic figures. Uh, so, you know, um, so it kind of a rejection of a man by a prime and proper maiden, and what the story, and declares that he will come to her by night, giving her the kiss of a vampire. He will suck her blood, and claims the way of the vampires are superior to her Christian beliefs. You have here, of course, this blends a sense of horror and eroticism. There's this idea like, well, I'm going to become a vampire. I'm going to die, but I am going to be transformed. I'm going to become a monster. And so this is the Lord. Now that we understand the monster thesis, we understand what this connects to, the deeper, darker ideas, the draw of it. Let's go to the next image. Then we go to Edmund Burke. Old Edmund Burke, 1729 to 1797. Yeah, he did not get out of the 18th century. He was an Anglo-Irish statesman, orator, philosopher from Dublin. He wrote a philosophical inquiry into the origins of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful in 1757. What he does is he contrasts the beautiful, which is well informed and aesthetically pleasing, to that which he describes as the sublime, which has the power to compel and even destroy us. So the word sublime means to elevate or exalt, especially in dignity and honor, to render finer, into purity or excellence. It is a feeling that inspires awe and can be a purely inward experience of consciousness. So that's what it is. And so he goes into that, and he looks into this, and he says, okay, so in many ways, these feelings that we have can be pleasant, but they can be also unpleasant. And awe has two sides to it. it has a side where we are prostrating ourselves with this feeling of reverence, but also we are also prostrating ourselves with this feeling of complete terror that it can kill us at any time, right? It's after us. So he goes on. The idea that political democracy implied a loss of the individual soul along with the loss of traditional sources of power. As the democratic ideas are spreading across, people feel like there's a transition when it comes to the power structures. So the idea is that the mysterious and the unexplainable, seemingly banished by the bright light of reason, began to erupt everywhere. Hair was in the air. And then all of a sudden, guess what? We got the French Revolution. We got the reign of terror. So this idea of the Enlightenment, this idea that we're all going to get along, this idea of progress, it starts falling apart. And people start questioning this. And in Ireland and other places, everything starts to erupt. Burke will use the terms horror and terror interchangeably. But as time goes on, there will be a distinction between those two. So there you have it. And so basically, I'm going to go more into this later, but terror is the feeling of dread and anticipation that comes from a frightening experience, suspense, or suggestion, while horror is the feeling of revulsion that comes afterwards. It's sudden, it's grotesque. So, in a sense, terror is of the unknown creature that was scratching at the door in my beginning illustration, while horror is seeing uh, what happens once that monster comes in through the door, seeing the carnage, seeing the mess, seeing and that which affects us. So, terror is from the Latin terrene, which means to frighten or to fill with fear. Horror uh, from French and then Latin means dread, but also horus, hair. It's that which makes the hair stand on end. So there you have it. So now we move to the next image. And this is considered, Horace Walpole wrote what is considered the first Gothic dash horror novel. This is it. We were already there. This is the first one. The others were precursors. There he is right there. There's old Horace. He was the youngest son of a Robert Walpole, who was the first English politician to be called a prime minister, which means there's plenty of money to go around. He was a member of Parliament. He was there for quite a while before he even wrote his novel. Horace's other significant claim was his construction of Strawberry Hill. Let's look at the next image, which was outside, and still is outside of London. This was a Gothic mansion built from the base of a very small 17th century cottage, but he had grand ideas. So, like the mixture of his story, what he does is that he builds this great castle, which is very, very much romantic. Let's go to the next image. So, some parts of this story are influenced by what's called the life of Manfred of Sicily, who lived between 1232 to 1266. And of course, as it is the first novel, I need to give an actual summary of it. So the story goes is that Conrad, Manfred's son, was set to marry the Princess Isabella. But just before his marriage, a giant helmet falls upon him from above and kills him. So kills old Conrad. The event appeared to fulfill an ancient prophecy that foretold that the castle and lordship of Otranto would pass from the present family whenever the real owner should be grown too large to inhabit it. Worried that this event foretold the end of his line, Manfred Of course, having lost his son, he decides to divorce his wife, Hippolyta, who did not provide a male heir, and he decides to marry Isabella himself, as opposed to originally his son. So it's like dad's going to marry Isabella. Isabella, for some reason, which makes a lot of sense, does not want to marry Manfred and is assisted by a peasant named Theodore to seek refuge in a church and is promised to be kept safe there by a certain friar by the name of Jerome. So what happens is, well, Theodore is found out, and Manfred orders Theodore to be executed. And when his shirt is removed, the friar recognizes that he is his son from the blemishes on his shoulder. Manfred says that the priest is to release his promise of asylum to Isabella in return for his son's life. Suddenly, troops from another kingdom wish to rescue Isabella, and they arrive. And in this chaos, Isabella, of course, escapes, which is good. Well, Manfred basically locks Theodore, in the tower, who is then rescued by Manfred's daughter, Matilda. It sounds like this really complicated soap opera. Theodore finds Isabella in an underground church, hides her in a cave, and is wounded while fighting one of the knights sent after him, who ends up being Frederick, Isabella's father. Frederick, next image, Frederick falls in love with Matilda, and so they begin to arrange a marriage between the two. Then Manfred thinks Isabella is secretly meeting Theodore, and so stabs this woman, who turns out to instead be his own daughter, who subsequently dies. And Manfred discovers Theodore is the true heir, and he marries Isabella while Manfred is left to grieve. Wow, what a story. And you almost have to draw an outline to see how they're all related. Well, this is the first novel. Well, it sounds a little better than the summary, but that's basically it. But I like the next one. And let's go to the next novel, next image. Gottfried August Berger's Lenora. 1773. This is a good one. Lenora. She patiently waits for the return of her fiance from the 7-Year War. Unfortunately, like so many, he fails to return. Well, this makes her very angry with God. So she says a few things to God that are not very nice. And Lenora's mother hears her words and she declares them as blasphemy and suggests that maybe he found some other woman in Hungary, Find comfort, Mom. So that night, at the stroke of midnight, a stranger knocks on the door, looking very much like William, asking her to join him on a midnight ride on his horse, and then from there, join him upon their marriage bed. Well, wow, what an invitation. So climbing upon the black steed, they move through eerie landscapes, riding at a very fast pace, too fast. Lenora, next image, Laura asks, why do they have to ride so fast? He responds, the dead travel fast. Die Toten reiten schnell. Now, the line, denn die Toten reiten schnell, for the dead ride fast, will be later quoted in Bram Stoker's classic Dracula. She quickly responds, leave the dead alone. Lass sie ruhen, die Toten. As the sun rises, they arrive at the gates of a cemetery, and as the horse disappears into the tombstones, her William becomes a skeletal figure holding a scythe and an hourglass, revealing that the owner of the horse was Death himself. Death then shows Lenora this marriage bed, which turns out to be William's grave, beneath which a skeleton lies surrounded by his shattered armor. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gives way as she begins to fall into the grave. Spirits surround her, dancing in the moonlight, declaring, "No one is to quarrel with God in heaven. Mit Gott in Himmel hadre nicht." However, Lenora, punished with death, still has hope for forgiveness. Das Leben bist du leidend, Gott sie dir so genoegen. This is a classic tale of horror, utilizing many of famous tropes that we, of course, will still see today. The next one, let's go to the next image. The next one is William Beckford's Vathek from 1786. This is a tale of a licentious caliph seeking supernatural power, and it was supposedly translated from the Arabic, but of course, yeah, it wasn't. The plot goes that Vathek was the ninth caliph of the Abbasids, whose eyes were so terrible that the wretch on whom it was fixed instantly fell backwards and sometimes expired. Vathek lived a life of indulgence, especially carousing with women, and even built 5 palaces representing the 5 pleasures of the senses. Vathek renounces Islam and turns to his Greek mother, Carinthus, who is well versed in science, astrology, and occult magic, for advice on to how to become more powerful through the dark arts. Vathek often killed scholars who did not agree with him, but one merchant from India failed to succumb to his evil eye, and so he imprisoned him. But the next day he escaped with all those guarding him dead. Vathek encounters a Gior, which means an unbeliever, who cures him of his sudden desire to keep drinking and reveals he has magical powers. Returning to the palace with him, where he now encourages the caliph's desires. The Gior makes a deal with Vathek that if he sacrifices 50 children of the city, he will gain immense occultic powers. So the caliph declares a competition with prizes for those children who competed. But when they arrive, the Gior magically opens up an ebony portal, and the caliph then throws them all into it. And after that, the opening then vanishes. The caliph's mother, Carinthus, sacrifices still more people to the jinn to order for her son to be granted the boon promised, and then finds out that to receive this power, he has to go to a certain Iskatar. In the end, basically, they're all damned. Now, let's go to the next image. Well, this story obviously meant much consternation amongst the British elite, whose sensibilities were greatly insulted. But you know what? Beckford was just one of those crazy Gothic novelists like Walpole and Lewis. Even though they were members of the Parliament, they were all considered sexually suspect. They became the topic of much scandal and gossip. But what happens is that, much like Walpole did with Strawberry Hill, Beckford had his own Gothic mansion built, and this is it. Look at that mansion. It's pretty amazing with the tower. This mansion was built between 1796 to 1813. It does mix elements of mansion, castle, and church architecture intentionally. It looks like a church, doesn't it? This is the guy's home. It had a spire that rose 90 meters. That's 300 feet high. It was, however, structurally unsound, so it collapsed. And then he simply built a second tower, which was also 90 meters, which also collapsed in 1812, which damaged the entire west wing of the estate. But, these people, you didn't realize this movement was so dynamic, did you? The beginning of the horror genre and the Gothic literature started not with a whimper, but a huge bang of these extremely dynamic English characters. Let's get to the next image. Anne Radcliffe's. This is the Mysteries Udolpho, published in 1794. The story goes that Emily St. Albert was a very sensitive and sweet and beautiful in appearance. She was an only child of a once wealthy family in Gascony. Their fortunes had declined. She was very close to her father, the mother having died before of a very serious illness. But she was a bookworm. She loved to read constantly, and she wanted to be just like her father and esteemed him greatly. The father also esteemed nature, the natural world, and so did she. But she was also fearful over what the future may have in store for her. So Emily then travels with her father along to the Mediterranean coast, and according to the story, in 1584. They travel together through the Pyrenees, and they encounter a very handsome Valancourt along the way, and the two fall in love. Emily's father dies, and now, as an orphan, she lives with her aunt. The two have nothing in common. Her aunt ignores her. And after her aunt marries the Italian noble Montoni, he wants to force her to marry his friend, Count Morano. Can you believe it? Who turns out to be financially in ruin. Montano brings Aunt Sharon and Emily to Morano's castle. Morano, still wanting to marry Emily, tries to steal her from his own castle, but she refuses since she still loves Valicant. Montoni wounds Morano, who then runs away. And Montoni, of course, is very cruel, throwing all kinds of hardships upon the aunt, unless she signs over to him all her property in Toulouse, which was supposedly to eventually be inherited by, of course, Emily. Eventually, the aunt dies as a result of his cruelty, all the while refusing to give up her property to him. Then there's all of a sudden, this is where it gets interesting, there's all these scary events happening in the castle. A lot of the tropes that we have connected to horror in regards to noises and feelings and chills and so forth is developed here. Eventually, Emily flees with Dupont, who was imprisoned in a castle. Emily learns that Valicant is now a poor man living in Paris, but still loved him, and they are reunited. So what happens here is Radcliffe uses ghosts to expose the origin of imaginative and emotional excess. And he uses subtle and implied terrors. So you're not sure if the place is haunted or not. But this is the big takeaway. You see, the reader is haunted by the possibility, in one case, of what lies behind the black veil. It's revealed, but you don't know what it is. You see, the reader is just sees what Emily is expressing. That's it. They see her reaction to what she saw, which makes her faint. All that is understood is that what lies behind the veil is no picture, but the rest is left to the imagination. This is another important horror trope. The idea is that we're not going to explain it all. We're not going to detail it all out. You're just going to have to figure it out on your own. It's unknown. You watch your reaction, but from there, you have to come up with what was behind the veil. And so it is an unsettled story because you don't fully understand what happened. So the next one, Matthew G. Lewis is called The Monk, 1796. This is a really spicy tale. There is a certain Ambrosio. Ambrosio, he's a devout monk, and he was left. He left on a doorstep of a monastery, and he was considered as a baby. He was left on there, not as a monk, and he was considered as a present from the Virgin Mary. Matilda, first known as a young boy named Rosario, looks upon Ambrosio with a respect approaching idolatry. Brought to the monastery, there is love falls in love with Ambrosio. And what happens is that this boy is then revealed to actually be a woman by the name of Matilda. So here we have a situation where it looks like it's a man and then reveals itself as herself as a woman. And so it's a beautiful woman by the name of Matilda. And Matilda now seduces Ambrosio and practices evil magic. Ambrosio and Matilda are then brought before the Inquisition. Both say that they're innocent. Matilda confesses later on that she's not innocent, and she's sentenced to be burned at the stake. Ambrosio continues to assert that he's innocent and that he's tortured. So he returns to his cell, and he has a vision of Matilda, who's now dead, telling him to surrender his soul to Satan, leaving behind a book of instructions telling him how to exact a ritual to accomplish this act. In the face of a second series of tortures, he admits to charges of rape, murder, and sorcery, and is ordered to be burned at the stake. Ambrosio asks Satan to save him, with the price being signed away of his soul, and so he is rescued, with Satan telling him that gaining his soul was the goal that he had for him the entire time, and that Matilda was the whole time simply his servant. So Satan then drops Ambrosio from a high place upon the rocks below, where he slowly dies and is damned for all eternity. So what is this? This is a combination of a morality tale with horror. Lewis, focuses on the explicit physicality of horror, the visceral feeling of it. Lewis dwells on sensual descriptions of horror that borders sometimes on the pornographic, right? But what happens is it's not only an unsettling story, it's so tangible. And so once again, all of these are components. You're seeing it as the horror genre comes about. Let's go to the next image. Then you have Goethe's The Bride of Corinth. The story revolves around a woman who returns from the grave to seek her love. It's inspired by a story of Pauline by Legend of Troilus. This involves a conflict between a young man who is a pagan, along with his relatives, and the family of the dead girl who happens to be a Christian. The girl's mother broke their engagement and forced her to become a nun, a commitment that eventually killed her. The motive behind the girl's return as a specter is that even an earth can never cool down love. So she returns because she just loves so much. He says, from my grave to wander I am forced, still to seek the God's long severed link, still to love the bridegroom I have lost, and the lifeblood of his heart to drink. And so this is a tale of a ghost, but a ghost that is deeply in love. Let's go to the next image. Samuel Taylor's Coleridge's Cristobal. This is a long narrative poem written in two parts, one published in 1797, the other in 1800. It involves a central female character of the same name and her encounter with a stranger called Geraldine, who claims to have been abducted from her home by a band of rough men. Cristobal goes into the woods to pray by the large oak tree, where she hears a strange noise and finds Geraldine, who tells her how she was abducted. Feeling bad for her misfortunes, Cristobal invites her to come to her home with various portents, dogs barking, mysterious flames, indicating this is not a wise decision. They then spend the night together, where Geraldine shows her a terrible but undefined mark. Behold, her bosom and half her side, a sight to dream of, not to tell, and she is to sleep by Christabel. Christabel's father, Sir Leoline, becomes enchanted with Geraldine, ordering a grand procession to announce her rescue. And then the poem, for some reason, decides to end right there. So the next one, a 1799, next image. I won't spend too much time on this one, but the next one is Charles Brockden Brown's Edgar Huntley. And this is said to be also known as the Memoir of a Sleepwalker. And so it goes behind. But what's interesting is that he tries to leave the common Gothic tropes. So he makes sure that he doesn't have Gothic castles or Gothic conventions. And so he tries to modernize the area, or I should say, modernize uh, the genre. But of course, it doesn't really hold. It doesn't stick in any way. So what happens now is we're moving into the next century, the 19th century. Next image, we had Robert Southey's Thalana the Destroyer. This is an interesting epic poem. This is basically a story of a sorcerer who learned they were doomed unless they destroyed a certain family known as the Hodori family. Now, while they killed most of them, the young child named Thalaba escapes. One of the sorcerers was killed by a great storm, and by chance, his ring then became possessed by Thalaba. Thalaba then travels all over the Middle East looking for a way to destroy those who are working against him, because he is shown as true to Allah. Thalaba's deceased beloved by the name of Oniza, who died on their wedding day, turns into a vampire and returns to him. It says, her very lineaments and such as death had changed them, livid cheeks and lips of blue, but in her eyes there dwelt brightness more terrible than all the loathsomeness of death, unquote. Okay, so the next, of course, is not unexpected. The next is, of course, Grimm's Fairy Tales. That's right. It is published by Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. Of course, and so obviously they they both attended Phillips University of Marburg, and they enjoyed free access to the personal library of a certain Friedrich Karl von Sauvignon, which, by the way, included many volumes on folklore. You see where we're going with this one. Basically, the lesson is never let somebody go through your library unsupervised, because you never know what kind of mysteries they will dig up. Who knows what you'll find in my collection of 5,000 books behind me? Beware. So what happens is that they start collecting all of these interesting stories. And then what they did is they collected stories that were orally transmitted, and they revised them, and eventually the first volume contained 86 stories. By the seventh edition, so this was published in 1812, by the seventh edition published in 1857, it wasn't 86 stories anymore. It was a total of 211 fairy tales. But many of them connect to earlier mythology and folklore that has horrific elements that, when brought to general consumption, will now enter into the mindset of the horror genre. So one of them is called Children Played at Slaughtering. Children Played at Slaughtering. So basically, this story goes, children are pretending to be a butcher and a pig. One boy cuts the throat of his little brother and then finds himself stabbed in the heart by his angry mother. But because she left her other son in the bath to stab his brother, he in turn drowned. It's like a no-win, right? Now, realizing her children were dead, unable to go on, she does hang herself. When her husband gets home, he becomes so despondent that he died soon afterwards. So these are really positive stories that show how wonderful the cohesion of the family could be during the Middle Ages into the modern era. That was called sarcasm. These are the kind of stories these Germans told their kids. They would be censored today. How about this one? This is called the Children of Famine. So during the famine, a starving mother says she will have to kill her daughters because there's nothing left to eat in the house. They offer her some bread, but it's not enough. You've got to die or else we'll waste away. Her daughters then declare, we'll lie down and sleep, and we won't get up again until Judgment Day arrives. They enter into an almost eternal sleep. Their mother leaves and disappears. I guess, I think they die. I don't know. It seems like it. Oh, look at this one. It's called Cinderella. Looks like old Walt Disney is kind of going through these. In this story, Cinderella has an evil stepmother and two wicked stepsisters who make her life miserable. Sound familiar so far? Forced to do unbearable chores, including picking lentils out of the ashes. I don't want to do that at all. Picking lentils out of the ashes? What ridiculous work. Her fairy godmother does appear as a magical tree with little birds. Now, I love this because this connects to the idea of tree spirits. It connects to the animism of German folklore. And so she's a magical tree, little birds, and they are going to help her out. So she meets a handsome prince. When the stepsisters fail to fit into the golden shoe, because, we skipped that part of the story, one hacks off a toe and the other a heel. It's a little bit more carnage here. They all have their eyes pecked out by birds in the end. So basically, happy ever after. Not for Cinderella. She doesn't have her eyes pecked out. She is with the prince. So that's good news. But this other version, how about Rapunzel? Yeah, that's here. A pregnant woman asks her husband to get rampion from her neighbor's yard owned by a certain Dame Gothel, since she is craving it, but eventually gets caught, and so they are forced to promise their child to this neighbor as compensation for trespassing. As it turns out, Dame Gothel is an evil enchantress and ends up locking this child named Rapunzel in her tower. She becomes a very beautiful woman with long hair that is long enough to climb up to her window. The king's son visits her via her hair stairway, and the two fall in love. Dame Gothel then cuts off Rapunzel's hair and sends her out to live in the desert, where she gives birth to twins. What? You didn't hear about that one? Dame Gothel then blinds the king's son, but eventually the prince is healed and her and Rapunzel are reunited. Again, a lot more in the way of darker stuff going on here. Now let's go to the next one. This is the big moment. That's right. Yes, Frankenstein. Right. So we're now to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, what happens is Shelley traveled throughout Europe in 1814, and she went along the Rhine River. And in fact, it says that she went to a castle near Darmstadt. I've been to Darmstadt, which is known for alchemical lab, and was influenced by this castle for Frankenstein's castle. She went also to Switzerland. Her traveling companions were also kind of like rascals. They're very much into the occult. Of course, this is Percy Shelley, her future husband. And so it is Mary, Percy, and Lord Byron were said to have had a competition for who could write the best horror story. So by 1818, I'm telling you, see, the reason why I talked about all these horror stories, and I want you to understand that all these conventions that we see in the horror genre are already pretty well formed by the time we get to 1818. And now we're at the state where people are competing who could write the best horror story. That's how popular they were. So what happened in the late 18th century, you have all these misfits of society, working in horror. Now you still have misfits of society, but it's now entered into popular culture where everybody seems to like doing it. And of course, this is the case of this group that gathered together. The result for Shelley writing her story was, of course, Frankenstein. Shelley began writing Frankenstein when she was 18. When she was 20, the first edition was published, but it was published anonymously in London on January 1st, 1818. She doesn't even have her name on it, which is very upsetting. You would think that she would get credit, but welcome to this era. Shelley's name finally appears on the second edition, but you're going to have to wait till 1823. The narrative, of course, consists of a series of letters by Captain Robert Walton to Margaret Walton Saville, his sister. So basically, you have a series of stories. We pretty much know the Frankenstein story. It's important, though, to understand that when people decide to read Frankenstein, they think they're going to read a straight narrative. They're not expecting to read a series of letters that are going back and forth. But there you have it. I will say a little bit more. So you have basically Victor Frankenstein's story. As a child, he's encouraged to explore the natural wonders of the world and to understand the world in a scientific way, especially through chemistry. So he is connected to the scientific method. But he's also fascinated with death. His mom dies of scarlet fever. It disturbed him that humanity was limited by its very mortality. So while at the university, Frankenstein discovers secret techniques to impart life to non-living matter. And so what he does is he goes around, he collects a bunch of cadavers to create this ideal human. But he had a little, his surgical skills were a little bit off here and there. In fact, he had great intentions, but his creature turned out to be rather hideous than beautiful. In fact, when it's made, Frankenstein actually runs away at the sight of his monster, and the creature soon escapes. So you're seeing right here, going back, you're seeing so much that's connected to our ideas of a monster. So Victor finds out his brother by the name of William was murdered. He blames the monster for it since he was found near the crime scene, but no one would believe him. And so Justine Moritz, William's nanny, is hung for the crime. The monster then pursues Victor, catches him, and then tells him his story. And so now it's time for the creature's story. The creature has a perspective. The creature, he told of his loneliness. He said how most of the people he encountered feared him. They hated him, and they only hated him due to his monstrous and unusual appearance. And you go, wait, so this is about judgment of others. It is about making monsters of that of whom are on the edge of difference. They're different, right? So he lived near a poor family and he collected fireworks for them while keeping his form hidden. That's how he survived. Although he befriended the father who was blind, because, he can't see him, so nobody would be scared of him. All the rest kind of fled once he showed himself. He saw his reflection in a pool of water, and then he realized he was quite hideous. He also, by the way, in this version, the monster is very intelligent. He, in fact, taught himself to read. So he begged Victor to make a female version of himself as a companion, and that he would disappear after that. He'd go to South America. Just give me a companion. I'm so lonely. Give me somebody to be with. Victor then tells his next story. Victor takes over. He begins to make the female companion, but he fears the creature will not like her, or still he fears that this creature will get together with this female creation and procreate, and as a result make a new race of humanity. And so he destroys her. The creature tells him to try again, but he refuses. In response, he says that he will be with him on his wedding day, which Victor takes as a threat against his life as well as his bride. The creature does kill Henry Clerval, Victor's childhood friend, and Victor was accused of his murder at first. Anyway, the night after his wedding, the creature strangles his bride Elizabeth. So Victor chases by way the monster to the North Pole, with the ship then trapped in ice for a time, and then Victor dies as a result of hypothermia. Not exactly the ending that you would expect, with his last words that one should seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition. This is a cautionary tale against curiosity. It's against innovation. It's the idea that it's hubristic to extend life beyond our mortal limitations, and to think outside of that is to go against God, right? And so, by the way, the creature will vows to kill himself, leaves the ship, and disappears on a block of ice. But I want to say that who is the real monster? I think it's not, well, we do know, it's not the creature who's the monster. It's Frankenstein who is the monster. He's a monster to what he conceives or perceives as the monster. So this idea is that well, this idea also connects the concepts of technology with the horror genre. And so we're bringing in a whole new area. Now, the other part is Frankenstein is not only viewed as an important horror novel, it is also viewed as one of the first science novels connected to science fiction. With that said, there's an earlier one by Lucian of Samosata, written in the 2nd century CE, but we won't go there. But still, it does have these components. It's moving forward, but it is a cautionary tale against humanity going beyond its perceived limitations, and that technology can be something to be not trusted, and that it can work against us, which is kind of too bad, but there you have it. Let's go to the next image. We also have John Polidori's The Vampire, which is basically a story that I don't want to talk about, but basically we're getting into a more vampire novels that start to appear, that become popular. Let's go to the next image. We have also Charles Robert Marteran's Melmoth the Wanderer. And of course, Melmoth is a scholar who convinced the devil to give him 150 more years of life in exchange for his soul. And then, realizing his mistake, roams about the earth looking for someone to take over the pact from him. That's a very, he goes from place to place. It's like, please switch with me. I don't want to be damned for all eternity. So let's go to the next image. Okay, so now all of a sudden we're moving from just simply books, poems and books, to, well, magazines. And so Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, that flourished from the 1820s, 1840s, has, of course, many stories that were important to the Gothic genre that will be written. And so we have so many. What happens is that they'll write the story in different magazines. It'll be like this episode, and then the next magazine will have that episode. And so we have all these episodes, and eventually it comes together and becomes a full story. But you got to keep reading the magazine. Eventually, when it comes to part one, part two, part three, part four, part five, and so forth, that are placed these stories by these authors in these magazines. Eventually, what they'll do is that once they finish it, then they'll take these parts, put it together, and make a book out of it. But so this really does, once again, spearhead the Gothic genre. It makes it easier. And in some cases, the authors, they'll write a section and have no idea what they're going to write the next time around. It's like, what am I going to write next time? You know, they make it up as they go along. And when you read some of these, you really can tell. Okay, so now we enter, of course, the Victorian era, and American novels are starting to rise to prominence, known for their artistic and serious ability to affect emotion and to describe various kinds of scenes. And obviously, the Gothic genre becomes very much part of it. But what's interesting is that during this period of time, there's so much focus now upon psychological fear. Yeah. Also, during the same time in England, you got Charles Dickens. Remember A Christmas Carol? So that, of course, goes into the haunted psyche. And so once again, the psyche is spooking various hapless victims. And is it really a ghost, or is it a delusion? Is it a guilty conscience? And you're never sure quite what it is. Let's go to the next image. All right. So next is you have, I like this one. You have Reimer and Pickett's Varney the Vampire. Now, right away, I'm liking the name, Varney the Vampire. It was, again, written kind of as a serial between 1845 to 1847. It's also known as the Feast of Blood. And so basically, these were published in these cheap pamphlets that only cost a penny. And but they were filled with interesting, horrible kind of scary stuff. And obviously, these cheap pamphlets were called penny dreadfuls. So this is one of those penny dreadfuls that we're diving into. Varney found himself cursed to become a vampire following the fact that he betrayed a royalist to Oliver Cromwell, which, by the way, that's a terrible thing to do. Oliver Cromwell, not a nice guy, especially with Ireland, but moving along. He subsequently then killed his own son accidentally in a fit of anger. Varney then dies, but he is revived several times in the course of his career. He turns Clara Crofton, a member of another family he terrorizes, into a vampire for revenge. Then he commits suicide by throwing himself into Mount Vesuvius. Well, that's a pretty grand way to go. But this Varney now, what's important, this Varney has fangs which leave behind 2 puncture wounds on the neck of his victim. So you're getting the fangs that leaving puncture wounds, right? Varney also, in addition, has hypnotic powers and superhuman strength, but he can move during the daylight. So the vampire notions are really coming about. Next image, we have to mention him. It was more Varney the Vampire. Sorry, next image. There we go. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, 1809 to 1849. What a very short life he lived. Of course, he was an author of various short stories. He's a master of the mystery and macabre. He ventured into what was called dark romanticism. He looked into the repressed shadows that lurked deep within Victorian life, especially interested in ideas related to terror. He also was obsessed with death and suffering and torture and mourning and burial that was premature. So you're kind of stuck in your grave trying to claw your way out. He was fascinated with decomposition. He was even interested in the reanimation of the dead, This is all part of Edgar Allan Poe. We don't have time to go through him, but you do have a good idea. Let's go to the next image. You also have Joseph Sheridan's Le Fanu. This is fascinating. This okay, so this is so what happens is that Le Fanu writes a few important works. One is called In a Glass Darkly, published in 1872, and the other is Carmela, published in 1872 as well. She's very much into the supernatural, but she likes to place it within everyday life events. So she likes to focus upon not some count or baron or princess or somebody of the aristocracy. What she likes to do is focus upon ordinary innocent victims. That's her focus. And she also was very much into psychological drama. She wanted to go into fear, but she wants to go into the perception of fear, how people view it, how people experience it. So, Fanu and Carmela, the story is narrated by a young woman by the name of Laura, who is preyed upon by a female vampire by the name of Carmela, later revealed to be a certain Mercala, the Countess Karnstein. And so basically, this is presented as a story as part of the casebook of a certain Dr. Hesselius. So the story goes, at the age of 6, Laura beheld a vision of a beautiful visitor in her bedchamber, and she asserted that she was being punctured in her breast. At 18, a carriage accident outside Laura's home brings a girl named Carmela, who is her age, and she instantly recognizes her as from her vision a year before. Carmela and Laura become very close with romantic gestures on the part of Carmela. Carmela refuses to tell anything about herself and never joins the household in its regular prayers. During this time, many young women and girls in the nearby town began dying of some strange, unknown illness. When a shipment of restored heirloom paintings arrived, Laura finds a portrait of her ancestor Mercella, Countess Karnstein, dated 1698. The portrait, of course, resembles Carmela exactly, down to the very mole upon her neck. Laura has nightmares of a large cat-like beast entering her room, biting her on the chest. Blue spots appear on her chest. Laura and her father encounter a certain General Spielsdorf, who tells how her niece, Bertha, met a young woman by the name of Melarca. Sounds like a bunch of malarkey, right? Who stayed with them, and then she fell ill, and they realized she had been visited by a vampire. Eventually, Mercella's hidden tomb is discovered, and a stake is driven through its heart, with the body and head burned and thrown into a nearby river. So this is the story. This is also has much in the way of eroticism and female to female eroticism within this textbook. I'm sorry, put this with it's not textbook. Maybe it is within this work of fiction, and so some will regard it as the beginning of the lesbian genre of literature, starting within the horror area. Okay, so next, so we're going next is, of course, you have Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, 1887. And what this is interesting. Stevenson is really fascinated by the interplay between good and evil that's within people. And so then he had a dream that would eventually become 3 scenes in his story. And so this really does go into the human psyche and how we are so often divided within. So it explores dualities. There is both good and evil within humanity. There is the civilized and the animal within us. We have, of course, this outward respectability, but however, we may possibly have inward lust, which, of course, is the secret of Victorian society. Let's go to the next one. Oh boy, the next one. Oscar Wilde. This is the picture of Dorian Gray, 1891. And so what happens is in this story, Basil Hallward paints a full-length portrait of Dorian Gray and views him as his artistic muse. Dorian meets Lord Henry Wotton via Basil. Dorian Gray embraces Lord Henry Wotton's view of life, which is one of constant pleasure and the adoration of beauty. What could go wrong with that? Fearing that his youth and beauty will fade, Dorian Gray wishes to sell his soul so that the effects of age will switch over to the portrait itself, and this desire comes to be. Dorian Gray meets the actress Sybil Vane. He courts her. Sybil calls him my Prince Charming. He and his friends go and see her perform in Romeo and Juliet, but distracted by his presence, she does not perform very well. Dorian, embarrassed by her and the impression of his friends of why he is interested in her in the first place, rejects Sybil, saying that acting is what made her beautiful, and without that, she was nothing to him. When Dorian returns home, he notices his portrait has changed, now having a sneer of cruelty matching his actions. Wishing to reconcile, he discovers it was too late. Sybil was so upset by how he treated her that she actually killed herself. Dorian Gray delves into every kind of debauchery after that. He's confronted by Basil, who sees his portrait that is now almost unrecognizable. This is, of course, a result of his accumulated sins. He asked Dorian Gray to pray for his salvation. Dorian Gray blames Basil for everything, stabbing and killing him. And then he blackmails his friend, his scientist, Alan Campbell, to dispose of Basil's body chemically so there would be no trace. And because of this ordeal, Alan also eventually takes his own life. There's lots of death going on here. Jane Vane then seeks retribution against Dorian Gray for causing Sybil's death 18 years earlier and encounters him in the opium den by this point, but cannot believe it is him since he has not aged and lets him go. When he realizes his mistake, he pursues him again, but a hunter accidentally shoots him while hiding in a thicket. I mean, this is just one. This is the way these kinds of stories go. Dorian Gray then returns to Lord Henry Wotton, declaring his resolve to be righteous from now on. Yeah, okay. And he also wishes to reform for his new love interest, which is a certain Hetty Merton. But when he checks his portrait, the image of himself was even worse. And so he had the epiphany that this new way of life simply was another vain adventure to settle his curiosity. Desperate to absolve himself, Dorian Gray stabs the portrait with the very knife he used to kill Basil, resulting in a blood-curdling scream heard wide and far. The body of an old man stabbed in the heart is then discovered by the rings on his finger, and is discovered that this was the body of Dorian Gray. Whoa, what a story. Concerning this work, Oscar Wilde said, in every first novel, the hero is the author as Christ or a Faust. When published, Dorian Gray basically offended everyone by this whole thing, because it is a reflection, get my pun, of the Victorian society at that time, that they're trying to look all good and proper, but in reality, they're much like the portrait of Dorian Gray. They are corrupt. They cannot hide their deep, depraved notions. And basically, you just need to admit to it, as opposed to just hiding under the surface, the glass surface. Next image, Bram Stoker's, of course, Dracula's 1897. And he decided to get into this by researching investigating European folklore, especially stories concerning vampires. Later, he also claimed that he had a nightmare caused by eating too much crab meat covered with mayonnaise sauce. So beware of too much crab meat with mayonnaise sauce, because what will happen is you'll come up with something like Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm not sure if I see the connection, but there you go. Well, So what will happen now is that we're getting now into great changes, and we're moving into the advent of film. Let's go there. Next image. So what happens now is that we're moving from books to film, and that's going to necessitate many changes, right? And so what happens is now the description has to go within a new kind of medium. And this medium needs to be, in a sense, realistic, and it's going to be fully dimensional, which causes so many different changes. And of course, that means also, so what will happen is we do have some early silent movies. Um, for instance, you have the Core of Demons that came out in 1898, Esmeralda 1905, Hunchback 1909, Frankenstein 1910, Hunchback of Notre Dame 1911, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari 1920. This is an example of German expressionism. I highly recommend it. You also have Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So basically, a lot of the winning novels that we saw early, in the 19th century are now being placed and made into silent films. Of course, the 30s was a great time for silent. For not now, the soundies are coming around, so now you have to deal with sound. And of course, you got Frankenstein 1931, Dracula 1931. This is with Bela Lugosi. Let's go to the next image. There's Frankenstein 1931. Next image. Dracula 1931. There's Bela Lugosi. We have Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. We have The Mummy 1932 with Karloff. Let's go to the next image. We have King Kong. We have The Invisible Man. And of course, we have Bride of Frankenstein 1935. So the 30s are oftentimes known as the era of horror movies. This is, people are going through the Great Depression. They're wanting to escape. They have feelings of much trepidation. There's not a lot of money going on here. The horrors are starting to build in Europe, especially the latter part of the 1930s. And so what will happen is that the horror genre was viewed as a catharsis. They could work through their miseries and basically feel better about themselves because these people are not doing very well. Sorry to be so basic about it, but there you have it. You have Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954 is a favorite. And next image, also you have the Dracula theme becomes very popular. The Horrors of Dracula, 1958. The Return of Dracula, you can see right here. You have Christopher Lee. Of course, later on, he will be in Lord of the Rings. Peter Cushing is there. So, yeah. Now, moving right along, next image. And then you have Psycho. Psycho starts a brand new kind of, this is, of course, Alfred Hitchcock. And this is the beginning of the slasher. Psycho is the beginning of the slasher kind of film. We can all remember the what happened in the shower all of a sudden. Yeah, the knife going across. And then of course we move on to the next one that's pretty much a big deal. This is the Night of the Living Dead. This is 1968. It's a George Romero film. This one I want to focus in just for a few moments. Obviously, they are zombies, but the reason why they are zombies is not because of a supernatural reason. It's because of a natural occurrence that caused this to happen. which is interesting in and of itself. So you have these zombies going about, and what is also curious is that for the main protagonist is African American. He's a protagonist. He's trying to fight against the zombies, but he's also not only trying to fight against the zombies, but he's also being faced with ignorant masses that are able to distinguish the difference between the zombies and those who are trying to stop the zombies. And so you're going to have these individuals that look kind of pretty ignorant, and they go about and they end up shooting the African American uh, main protagonist. Why that is important? There's a reason why I'm bringing it up. Why that is important is that when they had to finish the print. They just put it into the trunk of their car. They're about to bring it to the studio. There was word that Martin Luther King was shot. And of course, in the film portrayal, it shows him being shot. They show this bumpkin-like prejudicial man with his gun saying, shoot him right between the eyes, get him right there. And he just, not knowing he's not a zombie, but assuming, making the assumption, shoots him down dead. When this movie came out at the same time as this situation that happened to Martin Luther King, everybody's going to the movies and they're going, this is what America has become. It's a time where so much of us are becoming zombie-like in our lifestyle, and we're just following the rhythm and patterns of what is established as American culture, and we have no distinction, and we are prejudicial against those who are other than ourselves. And so this became a rallying point. And of course, Romero himself says, hey, you know what? It looked like peace and love were not working out after all. And that the people are realizing, of course, you have Vietnam going on at this time. They're realizing that they need to fight the system. And so people are rising up and they're protesting. And this movie became a social commentary to that era. So it's a very important movie. But what it did is it suddenly placed the horror genre right in the front of everybody's minds. Next image. And then you have Rosemary's Baby. This was, of course, you have Roman Polanski. And I want to say about this movie, there's Mia Farrow. And, she's sporting a pretty cool Vita Sassoon hairdo right there. Anyway, okay, what happens is this. Rosemary's Baby, basically, she comes to believe that her child is not of this world. And turns out the next door neighbors are Satanists, and they say that her kid in her body, in her belly, that came out of her belly, this kid was the spawn of Satan. It was Satan's son. Well, what's going to happen is that you're going, okay, that's an interesting story. It's, and in fact, in the end, it looks like the bad guys win, or supposedly bad guys. But what happens is there's another issue at stake. The character played by Mia Farrow is arguing that this baby is of her body, and that they're wanting to take this baby and have it for themselves. And she argues that this baby is hers, that she's the one who makes the choice of what to do with this baby, both inside and outside of the womb. So you see where this is going. It becomes a commentary on women's autonomy when it comes to their own bodies. And so once again, you're going, wait a second, Dr. Rietveld, it looks like you're figuring it out. We're taking a look at movies. As we're going through these movies, what happens is that these producers and these directors are wanting to make money. They're not, and so what they're going to do is they're going to figure out what that society at that time fears, what they dread. And of course, they want to be a part of the conversation of that culture of that time. So the best way to understand the fears of our society and culture in any given time is to study the horror movies that are made then. Got it? So you understand a lot about the 1960s, 1968, 60, through both The Night of the Living Dead as well as Rosemary's Baby. It demonstrates the thoughts of that time. Let's go on. Next image. Okay, so then you have The Exorcist. So in Rosemary's Baby, it looks like evil had won the day. And so where do we go from here? Well, we go from here is that we say, well, maybe good should win the day. So the film was directed by William Friedkin. It was released in 1973. This movie was a success. It's in fact one of the most successful of all horror movies, and it led to a creation of many other copycat movies as a result. In The Exorcist, there are two main sources of weakness: the young Regan's uncertain passage from girlhood to womanhood, as well as her need for a trustworthy father figure after her mother Chris's divorce. And it is also a story of the crisis of faith of a certain Father Karras, who is a priest, but he's also a psychologist, with his guilt over his mother's lonely death now, of course, affecting him quite a bit. The Exorcist is really about the evils of repression. And what I want to say about this is a few things. First of all, I'll just go ahead and tell you. So you're thinking, if you've seen The Exorcist, it's pretty upsetting on so many different levels. And what happens is that it looks like the mom is trying so hard to cure her daughter, who has all these ailments, and that apparently she could be demon possessed. But she goes through all the steps. So she goes to the doctors, and the doctors go through all of these kinds of exams and everything else. And sometimes how they depict it in the film is pretty upsetting. But what happens then is that, well, it doesn't seem to work. So maybe it's a mental situation. And maybe the doctors are going, oh, that means you have to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They go, oh, can't do that because this is 1970s. So then it goes up to that level, and that doesn't seem to have an answer. So it seems like science doesn't have any answer to what's wrong with this little girl. So who's going to have the answer? And of course, the answer for Regan is the church comes in, right? So the church and the exorcism through going, of course, eventually you're going to have a situation where Father Karras is going to perform an exorcism, and eventually it's going to take the demon out of Regan, and she's going to be cured, but at the cost of his own life, where he jumps out of the window because he takes the demon unto himself, and then he basically kills himself. Well, kills himself sort of, not a suicide, but he's trying to kill the demon like a sacrifice of Christ and so forth. Yada yada. Okay, so this movie is still horrifying. You got all the the head spinning around, spitting stuff all over the place. Lots of noises, speaking words backwards. Growling, clawing, going up and down stairs in a strange inverted position. It is an upsetting film. And what happened is that when this came out, the lines were wrapped around the buildings. People were going to see this movie in droves. And in fact, to such an extent that they're waiting like 4 or 5 hours in line to watch this movie. And sometimes they're there early in the morning, or sometimes they came late at night and they slept there It's almost like Star Wars happened in 1977. This is happening earlier in 73. But what I want to say is that they interviewed these various individuals who are watching The Exorcist and asked them what they felt about it. Many of them, this is interesting, many of them could not get through the film. They saw one person only got through 10 minutes, and I don't know what's scary the first 10 minutes in, but they could not get through the film, and many of them fainted. On average, according to the newspapers at that time, on average, they had 5 to 7 people faint in every showing of The Exorcist, to the point where the people who were working at the theaters had to have smelling salts with them, and they had to figure out how to take the people out of the theater safely and get them medical attention. They talked about ambulances going back and forth to the hospital. I mean, this really rocked people. And yet, the interesting thing is, if people watch this today, they hardly move a muscle. Because what happens is that it was scary for that time, but for many of the Gen Zers I know, they'll watch this and they'll laugh. Oh, what's this about? This is not scary, it's campy. And so what happens is that we need a deeper thrill. We need a deeper chill to get us motivated. We don't need to have it at this level. No, we want to be scared at a higher pitch. So it takes more. We become numb to the strategies that were used in 1973. The other thing I want to bring up is that did you guys know that the Pope at that time encouraged people to see it? Did you guys know that, here it is, three Jesuits, these are, the followers, obviously they're Society of Jesus under the Pope. 3 Jesuits were advisors on the film The Exorcist. 3 Jesuits, and 2 were actually in the film. Did you know that? What? The Catholic Church is endorsing this? How is that possible? Well, as they realized from the interviews, a large portion of the people who went to see The Exorcist were Catholics, because we're going back to earlier themes. It is the devil that gives us the most fear. And so for Catholics, because it dealt with a Christian theme, it scared them more than people who are outside of a Christian tradition. On top of that, they often said, "Oh, I saw this film, makes me want to go back to church." And that's exactly what happened. So the priest would say, "Go ahead, go see The Exorcist." It would scare the laity stiff, to the point where they started filling in droves the church. They're filling it up. So you can see, though, interestingly enough, amongst Protestants, it was the opposite. Amongst Protestants, they said, whatever you do, don't see that film. Many of the pastors did go see the film, but they said no to their congregations. But it's interesting. This is happening, of course, during 1973. 1973 is the height of what's called the Jesus movement. So what's going on is, the hippie movement starting to fade, and you have like films like Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell going on there. And and you have these evangelical movements going through here, and Christian rock kind of starting up there, and Randy Stonehill and all these other types, Keith Green, they're all kind of the Vineyard, all these different groups are going about. And at this time, the Catholic Church is going, hey, we want, because these are mostly Protestants. They're going, hey, we want to up our enrollment because less people are going to our church. So actually, it's funny that negative kind of film would scare people back into the pews. But there you have it. You're learning again way too much. Going to and of course also this act as a counterbalance to Rosemary's Baby, where it looks like Satan was losing. Now here God is winning, the day. But it also talks about the omnipotence of evil. There's one scene where Karras was in the subway, and the old man says to him, "Can you help a poor altar boy father? He wanted to have some food." He's like this bum laying there in the subway station. Now, Father Karras hears that. Later on in the movie, Reagan is going through her convulsions and her head spinning around, and the devil is supposedly speaking through her. And all of a sudden, her voice becomes exactly that of the man uh, in the subway station, saying, "Can you help a poor altar boy father? Uh, I'm a Catholic." And he says it. She says it exactly with the same voice. And of course, that's unnerving. So the idea is that it's the omnipotence of evil. It's everywhere. It's a monster that cannot be defined. And of course, the only hope, of course, for their perspective, is salvation through the church. Next image. There is the famous picture of Reagan. Also, by the way, the Ouija board was depicted in The Exorcist. Before the Exorcist, the Ouija board was viewed as a spirit board. It was even used as a dating game kind of thing. You invite your date to get together and work the Ouija board. Yay! But after what happens is that this is she, when still a normal little girl, she's using this Ouija board to connect to a certain Captain Howdy, who, by the way, has the same kind of name as her father, who's no longer there. Anyway, so she's using it to contact the spirit, and it's believed that the spirit or the demon then enters in via this Ouija board. So after 1973, the Ouija board becomes connected to demons or the dark side. Before this time, it wasn't. I mean, the origins go back to the Civil War, and then patent in 1890, and then this was used connected to spiritualism, and so this was something that was meant to contact spirits of loved ones, and it was kind of a fun thing. And then, of course, this movie ruined it. Next image. Oh, no. So this is a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You have Tobe Hooper made this movie. Why this movie is, this is a typical slash movie. It did come out in 1974. What is important about this one, other than, of course, the obvious, it is pretty scary, is that it was supposedly based on a true story. The director, somebody who did these kinds of atrocious things, and what obviously, but there's something else I want to bring up, and that is Hooper decided. I don't know why he did this. He decided that he wanted the various people involved in this film to make what he calls real screams. So what he did is he created a psychological context where the actors and actresses are actually suffering in many different ways to the point of delirium. They were shut into a house where the temperatures were ranging above 110 to 116 degrees. Of course, this was supposed to be a meat house, so the meat was rotting, and the actors and actresses were vomiting, and they're becoming, going through hysteria. By the way, my source for this information actually arrives from the director himself saying this is what he did. So this is not hearsay. This is not gossip. He said so. He told on himself. And this is, you can look up his interviews talking about what he did, because he wanted horror to be as real as possible. And he realized, he thought that people would connect more to the feeling of terror if the actors and actresses themselves were feeling it. And they did. They went crazy. Of course, he did talk about later on that they had a cast party and he was not invited to it. They were one place for their cast party, and he was sitting outside on some steps somewhere because nobody wanted to talk to him. But so this is the idea that we need, they wanted horror to be as realistic, like a happening as possible. And this movie does that. So, by the way, he himself says that these were not fake screams, not acting screams. They were real screams by the actresses, and people are just losing their minds. So you want a scary movie, but I don't agree ethically for how this movie was made. Let's keep moving on to the next image. All right. This one right here. Oh, okay. So we kind of skipped to oh, okay. Okay, so let's put that one down temporarily. Okay, so they all didn't show. That's fine. So I'll mention a few more real briefly. You also have movies like Shivers, which is, of course, David Cronenberg. And this movie, of course, it talks about that there is this disease that is a disease that's spread by it's sexually transmitted, and it's these creatures that pop out of your neck, and go into the other person as you're kissing or as you're having relationships. And so what happens is that these awful gushy creatures start to inhabit everybody and controls them and makes them into these pleasure-loving zombie-like creatures. And it's fascinating because what happens is this movie came out in 1975, and it's supposed to reflect that after the age of free love, that because a lot of people shared in the experience of free love, they're realizing they're having venereal diseases. And so, again, this is a horror movie that is addressing contemporaneous fears at that time, where people are realizing, uh-oh, I got something. And they see this movie and it plays upon those fears. You also have The Omen, 1976, Richard Donner, which, of course, you have this nice upstanding people, president, who have a kid who is going to be the Antichrist, and it's interesting. Gregory Peck is in it, and of course Lee Remick is in it as well. But it was interesting about The Omen is that this brings in the idea of a thriller ride. In fact, this markets the concept of not what you see, but what you don't see. So you're not sure if this little boy is orchestrating all of these mishaps going on. There's just, suddenly, the babysitter kills herself, everybody sees that. And suddenly these people who are surrounding this kid die of mysterious circumstances. In one case, there's a situation where there's this cart that has a sheet of glass, and it starts to roll down the hill, and this guy looks, and it actually it hits the wall. The cart stops, the glass continues and cuts off the guy's head. You have this kind of interesting stuff, but you still don't know, you're not sure what connects all of these unfortunate events until you start putting it together that, hey, maybe this kid is evil. And so it goes into that deductive theory. At the very end, however, the little kid breaks the fourth wall, and he smiles at the audience, with a big grin. You're not sure, that he's playing a game on all of us. So that's The Omen. Came out in 76. It was a hit. You have, of course, movies like Martin, 1977, or which is another Romero one, where what he does is that he this kid, he has these romantic ideas of vampires, but then he goes around and he sticks women with these needles, taking their blood, and it's like, what? There's like kind of a disconnect. But the important thing is to take from this, and it is important commentary, and it's something that you hadn't thought about, and that is Romero's trying to tell, and he says this. Romero's trying to say that vampirism is like rape. That's what it is. That's where it comes from in Victorian culture and earlier. It has connections to penetration. It's your person's not volunteering for it. The person's entering into the sanctity of the bedroom. It's doing something that is unasked. But then, of course, there's more to it. And so it goes into these ideas of exploitation. Now, what I find is fascinating is Romero, he did Night of the Living Dead, but he also does another movie. That was in 68. There's another movie called The Dawn of the Dead, which is also vampires in 1978. And what's interesting about this is these these zombies are no longer zombies connected to social upheaval. What he has these zombies going crazy, and they're going through a shopping mall. So he showing that as opposed to the late 60s, where they're all about social upheaval, and those who are the zombies are following the rules, and we need to rebel against this and so forth. What happens now is the zombies, they are the ultimate consumers, and so they're shown as stumbling through shoe places and going into clothing stores. They have no idea what they're doing. They're knocking everything over. And so this is a commentary against relentless consumerism, that we're consumed and zombie-like. We go and we look for that perfect pair of shoes, or we look for a nice, wonderful smelling candle. We feel this need to do this because society says that we want to be involved in incessant materialism. Well, this is the 1970s, late 70s. So, of course, this makes sense for that time. I'm telling you, movies change according to the era, right? And of course, yeah, movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I won't have time. Okay, so we have Halloween. So yeah, let's go ahead and show the scene, the next one we showed before. Halloween, 1978, John Carpenter. Then of course, you have Michael Myers. And this is the beginning of the slasher being revived. It actually kind of goes back earlier to Psycho, but what happens is that John Carpenter, he saw Psycho and he thought to himself, maybe we should just do the same kind of thing that happened in The Curtain over and over again. He, by the way, is kind of sad by this legacy, because he said everybody tried to follow after uh, Halloween, because making a movie like this is cheap. He made it. He filmed it in the South Pasadena, and it reminded him of his home in the Midwest. Kind of a desolate streets, but and you never know. And in this case, as opposed to the idea that the evil is supernatural, that is ever present, that we see in The Exorcist, the omnipotence of evil as being everywhere, eyes everywhere when it comes to the supernatural sense. What this goes is it crosses over that the neighbor next door, the person who's at the grocery store, the commoner could indeed be the evil that is watching you. So no longer are we simply looking for a supernatural explanation. Sometimes the evil resides within our own hearts, and so you never know. And there's a mask that we all carry, and you never know what lurks beneath the mask. And so Halloween by John Carpenter reflects this idea. But then again, people like the slasher aspect, and soon after, you're going to have other movies like Friday the 13th that will follow very soon after, in 2 years later in 1980. By the way, John Carpenter goes on to do quite a few other great movies. One is, of course, The Fog in 1980, one of my favorites. The other is The Thing with Kurt Russell, and in The Thing, of course, they're trapped in the Antarctica, and basically you have this this alien creature that is able to take the form of anybody. And so they're a small team and are not sure who is the killing alien and who isn't. And so once again, this explores the same kind of theme that the villain, the ghost, the monster can be any one of us. Okay, so let's put that scene down. Of course, there's others that I have that are our favorites. You have Poltergeist, 1982. Also, you have, I love Alien. Alien 1979, it actually brings together science fiction and horror. So you have science fiction horror that's coming together with that. And once again, you're dealing with a creature roaming around. The Shining, Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall. Of course, this is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Once again, The Shining is another fascinating movie, which I don't have a lot of time to talk about, but I'll just say a few words, very short words. I will say that it does deal with depression. It deals with the disillusion of the family. It deals with strife. It deals with guilt. It deals with unmitigated anger that is not resolved. That all comes apart when this couple with their little kid decide that they're going to go and watch over this grandiose hotel during the coldest of winters for the whole season. So what happens is this hotel closes down for the entire winter. It closes down for quite a few months, and they need to have some caretakers to watch after it. But it snows and they're completely isolated. Typically, this happens. And during this period of time, the character who plays Jack Nicholson, it starts to go crazy and starts losing it. But there's also paranormal activity starting to happen, and it starts to gradually increase. I will say, I'll just give you a little hint, that the hotel represents the United States, and it's built on an Indian graveyard. So that's a problem. So that's another interesting movie. Finally, of course, you have the Poltergeist as well as others. We've gone through a lot of movies, a lot of ideas. I will say that the horror genre is always evolving. It's always changing, and it changes to suit the different perspectives and fears of that time. A few favorites I have are Misery, 1990, of course, Silence of the Lambs, 1991, Candyman, 1992. A Blair Witch Project, 1999, actually does something different. It gives us real life footage aspect of the horror genre. It gives life to that concept. Of course, you have that What Lies Beneath, the others, 2001, The Ring, 2002, Resident Evil, 2002, The Order, 2003, Descent, 2005, Paranormal Activity, again, another live footage, The Orphanage, one of my favorites, 2007, The Orphan, 2009, Insidious, Jennifer's Body. The list goes on and on. It's always reinventing itself, and so we have to keep pace. And so what's the takeaway? Well, I think we understand very much the nature of horror. We understand that oftentimes when we look into the darkness looks back. And so horror enables us to see ourselves from a mirror that is darkly lit. It gives life to the darker shadow self of human nature that can never be avoided. We need our shadow self. It's part of who we are. It's part of our survival nature. It's a reason why we evolved to be where we are right now. This is the reason why we have fight, flight, and freeze responses. It's hardwired into us. And so so studying the horror genre really is a study of humanity and our hopes as well as our fears, what we try to avoid and what we try to cling and move towards. There's so much here, but I do have to close up. So what I'm going to do is say farewell and good night. And maybe you want to watch something spooky tonight. After all, it's Halloween season. Thank you.